Section 1. Origins: How the Simpsons was born. There is a television show that has been running since before most of the people watching this were old enough to read. A show that has outlasted every competitor, every cultural shift, every prediction of its own irrelevance. A show so deeply woven into the fabric of American life that most people stopped questioning it the way you stop questioning the sky. It is simply there. It has always been there. And tonight, we are going to spend a long, comfortable stretch of time drifting through its entire story, from the very first sketch on a napkin all the way to the deepest theories that the show's own writers have been forced to acknowledge on the record. So get comfortable, find your position, let your breathing slow down a little. There is nowhere you need to be tonight except right here, and we are going to take our time with this. The story of The Simpsons does not begin on a television screen. It begins in the lobby of a producer's office in Los Angeles in 1987, with a cartoonist named Matt Groening sitting in a waiting room, staring at a legal pad, with a meeting starting in a matter of minutes and no clear plan for what he was about to say. Groening had already built a reputation in the underground comics world. His newspaper strip, Life in Hell, had been running since the late 1970s, appearing in alternative weekly papers across the country. The strip featured a rotating cast including a melancholy rabbit named Binky and a pair of fez-wearing figures named Akbar and Jeff, who shared an ambiguous domestic situation that mainstream newspapers were never quite sure how to classify. The strip was strange and honest in a particular way that resonated with a particular kind of reader, someone who recognized in Groening's small, anxious characters the shape of their own interior life, their own quiet catalog of frustrations and small dignities and daily absurdities that the wider world seemed to have agreed not to discuss. James L. Brooks had been watching Groening's career with genuine interest. Brooks was one of the most accomplished producers in American television, the creative intelligence behind The Mary Tyler Moore Show and Taxi and Terms of Endearment, the kind of person who understands instinctively when something new is about to happen before it happens. He was developing a variety program for the Fox network, which had launched the previous year and was still working out its identity in a landscape long dominated by three major broadcasters. The show would star Tracy Ullman. Brooks had the idea that short animated segments could fill the time between Ullman's sketches, not just filler, something that developed its own following and its own reason to exist. He invited Groening to pitch something. Groening arrived intending to pitch an animated version of Life in Hell. He had a presentation ready. The characters were already fully developed across years of the strip. Bringing them into animation seemed natural. He was confident in the material. But somewhere in that waiting room, with the meeting perhaps 10 minutes away, something shifted in him. He began thinking about what it meant to hand Life in Hell to a network. The strip was his in a way that almost nothing else in his life was his. He had built it alone, sustained it through difficult years, developed every character across a decade. Selling it meant selling control. Whatever the network decided to do with it afterward, he would have limited ability to resist. So he made a different decision, right there in the lobby. He pulled out his legal pad. He started drawing. Quickly, without careful deliberation, pulling names from his own family because those were the names that arrived fastest. His father was Homer Groening. His mother was Margaret, who went by Marge. His sisters were named Lisa and Maggie. Bart came from rearranging the letters in Brat, and the name felt right immediately. Slightly wrong, slightly comic, just strange enough to be memorable. He drew a family. Not carefully, not with the deliberate attention to character design that typically precedes a major animated production. He drew the way you draw when you are trying to get something out before it evaporates. Fast, loose, instinctive. The figures came out with exaggerated features. Bulging eyes, expressions slightly off in a way that was difficult to name but immediately interesting. They were strange in a way that felt right rather than wrong. They looked like a family with problems. The specific, recognizable kind of problems that real families carry and rarely discuss. He walked into the meeting with a family he had invented in approximately 15 minutes. James L. Brooks saw something in those rough drawings. The family was not cute. They were not aspirational or reassuring or particularly likable in any conventional sense. They had an energy that seemed to press against the edges of the paper. They looked interesting to spend time with, which is the most fundamental thing you can say about a set of characters. The animated shorts began appearing on the Tracy Ullman Show in 1987. Watching those early segments now is a disorienting experience. The characters are recognizable. Same names, Same basic relationships, same household. But the animation is looser than anything the show would later produce. Inconsistent week to week, clearly made at a pace that prioritized getting it done over getting it precise. Homer moves differently. Bart's face has a different quality. The world is rougher, more provisional, but the relationships are already there. Homer's impatience and the warmth underneath it. Marge's resigned patience and the love she maintains for people who test it constantly. Bart's manic energy and the occasional surprising tenderness in his interactions with his father. Lisa's quiet intelligence, already being overlooked by the adults around her, already finding other languages to express what ordinary conversation couldn't hold. And Maggie, watching everything, saying nothing. The shorts developed a following that genuinely surprised the people making them. Viewers were coming to the Tracy Ullman Show specifically to see the animated family. Something about this strange yellow household was connecting with audiences in ways that had not been designed for and could not be entirely accounted for. Part of it was the specificity. Homer was not a generic television father. He was a particular man with particular anxieties and particular pleasures, and the shortness of the segments could not contain the sense that there was much more to say about him if the material was given room to breathe. Fox ordered a full half-hour series for the fall 1989 season. The premiere was later moved to December to allow stronger production quality. The work of building the full series from those short segments was essentially the work of inventing a new format without a template. There was no established model for what a primetime animated sitcom for adult audiences was supposed to be. The Flintstones' approach was a family comedy built on mid-century sitcom conventions and would not apply. The Saturday morning cartoon approach prioritized spectacle over character and would not serve. The Simpsons was attempting something that had not been fully tried before, and every decision about how to do it had to be made without reliable precedent. Al Jean and Mike Rice, both Harvard graduates who had been writing for late-night television, joined the writing staff early and helped establish a tone the show would maintain through its best years. Intelligent, slightly absurdist, emotionally honest underneath the jokes. Other writers came from journalism, academia, stand-up, and academic backgrounds unusual for television production. The room was intensely competitive in the specific way that good comedy writing rooms tend to be, where every joke is tested against the standard of whether it is actually funny rather than whether it sounds like it should be. And underneath the jokes, there had to be something true about what it feels like to be a person trying to live a life. The voice cast had developed the characters through the Tracy Ullman shorts and arrived at the full series with a depth of understanding that showed in every recording session. Dan Castellaneta had been refining Homer's voice through experimentation. He has described as starting from a Walter Matthau impression and moving gradually towards something wholly original. Something that carried Homer's specific mixture of absolute confidence and complete bewilderment in every syllable. Julie Kavner brought Marge to life with a vocal quality entirely her own, a slight rasp that made every line feel like it was being delivered by someone managing something just below the visible surface of what they were saying. Nancy Cartwright had originally auditioned for Lisa and chose Bart instead because she found him more interesting. Her interpretation gave him a manic energy that was her own creation. Yeardley Smith's Lisa was bright and slightly aching in equal proportions. The voice of someone who understood more than she was supposed to, and had not yet fully decided whether that was going to help her or hurt her in the world ahead. Harry Shearer and Hank Azaria filled enormous stretches of the supporting cast between them, giving each of the dozens of characters they voiced a distinct identity that made Springfield feel populated by actual people, rather than props arranged to serve the main family's stories. The series premiere aired the 17th of December 1989. The episode was a Christmas story called Simpsons Roasting on an Open Fire, and the holiday setting was a deliberate choice. Christmas provides immediate emotional context that helps audiences orient toward a new family, because Christmas is a shape everyone already knows, and placing new characters inside that shape lets audiences locate themselves relative to them quickly. The plot was simple and human. Homer's Christmas bonus is canceled. He needs money for his family's gifts. He tries his luck at dog racing, loses everything on a dog named Santa's Little Helper, and comes home with the dog as the only gift he can offer. 33 million people watched that episode. In 2025, 10 million viewers constitutes a major hit. The Simpsons walked into the cultural conversation on its premiere night and immediately staked out territory that almost nothing in the history of television has reached. It was not just watched, It was talked about the next morning at workplaces and schools, and around dinner tables in a way that no show had generated quite like that before. By the end of the first season, The Simpsons was a phenomenon. Bart Simpson shirts appeared on street carts. His catchphrases entered schoolyard vocabulary faster than adults could formulate a response. School administrators in multiple states attempted to ban the shirts on the grounds that Bart's relationship with authority was a bad influence. The bans generated news coverage. The coverage generated more interest. More interest generated more sales. Then President George H.W. Bush made a speech in January 1992, stating that America needed to be more like the Waltons and less like the Simpsons. He meant it as a critique. He was pointing at the show as a symptom of something troubling: the disrespect for authority, the chaotic family dynamics, the celebration of a father whose primary visible skills were consuming donuts and causing industrial accidents. The writers responded in the next available episode. The family watches the speech on television. Bart comments to the camera that the Simpsons are a lot like the Waltons. Both families were just hoping for the end of a depression. The joke is fast and precise and reveals everything essential about what The Simpsons was. The show talked back. It absorbed every criticism and converted it into material. It was self-aware in a way that primetime television had not quite managed before. Not breaking the fourth wall. Not making the kind of meta joke that dissolves the fiction, but acknowledging its own existence in the cultural landscape and engaging with that existence as a subject. Springfield accumulated through those first seasons with a quality that felt more like discovery than construction. Supporting characters arrived when episodes needed them and stayed because they worked. Because they were interesting to write for. Because viewers responded to them as if they were real people with real histories whose stories deserved continuation. Ned Flanders appeared as the neighbor whose relentless cheerfulness made Homer feel inadequate simply by existing. The cheerfulness was so consistent and so total that it seemed from the earliest episodes to be something maintained with effort, a performance rather than a natural state. Chief Wiggum arrived as the embodiment of institutional incompetence so thorough it begins to feel less like a personal failing and more like a structural feature of the institution he represents. Mr. Burns took shape episode by episode into something that exceeded caricature. His inability to remember Homer's name, played initially as a joke about employer contempt for labor, accumulated across seasons into something more troubling. And his survival across more than a century, we would eventually learn, was not accidental. Springfield became a place with genuine texture. The nuclear plant on the outskirts, Moe's Tavern where men with nowhere else to be gathered in companionable quiet, the elementary school, the church, the hospital, the retirement castle. The tire fire that had been burning for so long it had become a geographic feature of the landscape, incorporated into the town's identity, the way communities incorporate their own peculiarities. These were the bones of a world, built patiently across seasons, accumulating meaning the way real places do, through time and repetition and the slow weight of memory. If you are watching this late at night or early in the morning, leave a comment below. Tell us where you are in the world and what time it is where you are. There is something genuinely comforting about knowing that someone else, somewhere on the other side of the planet, is also spending time in Springfield tonight. And if you have not subscribed yet, please take a moment now. There is a great deal more story ahead, and some of the mysteries we are heading toward are ones that will stay with you long after the credits roll. Section 2. The Golden Age Seasons 1 through 8. Television has what critics call golden ages. Periods when a show operates at a level that exceeds anything its creators reasonably promised at the outset. When every episode feels like it is reaching for something and actually landing it. When the whole enterprise has a quality of being alive that is hard to describe precisely but immediately recognizable when you are inside it. For The Simpsons, that period runs from roughly the second season through the 8th. 8 years of sustained creative achievement. 8 years during which the show produced episodes that are still being analyzed, quoted, and loved by people who were not alive when they first aired. The benchmark against which every subsequent season has been measured and found wanting to varying degrees, depending on who you ask and how generous you are feeling toward the later material. Let us move through those seasons at a slow and comfortable pace. Season 2 arrived in 1990 with a confidence the first season had been building toward. The characters had settled into themselves. Homer's particular kind of haplessness had crystallized into something beyond generic bumbling. He was a specific man with specific anxieties and specific pleasures. The show had become precise enough about who he was that even his failures carried the weight of actual characterization. His love of donuts was not just a visual gag, it told you something real about him. Homer Simpson was a person who took intense, uncomplicated pleasure in small things, partly because his relationship with complexity was difficult at the best of times, and partly because the small pleasures were reliable in a way that larger ambitions rarely managed to be. The season premiere, Bart Gets an F, remained for many years one of the most emotionally exact things the show ever produced. Bart faces the real possibility of having to repeat a grade. The situation is treated seriously. He genuinely studies, putting an effort we have not seen from him before. He takes the test. He fails by a single point. Then it snows. School is canceled. He gets a second chance the following day, passes with 1 point to spare, and in the moment immediately after receiving his grade, he cries. The scene contains no jokes. It is a 10-year-old boy processing the feeling of almost losing something he was not entirely sure he wanted, recognizing that luck saved him at exactly the right moment, feeling the gap between what he deserved and what he received. The emotion is completely real and completely disproportionate in the way emotions in childhood are always disproportionate, and the fact that it comes in the middle of an episode that is also genuinely funny is the specific thing the Golden Age did better than almost any other television comedy has managed. The comedy creates the space. The emotion fills it. Neither mode undermines the other. Season 2 also introduced Blinky, a three-eyed fish caught in a river near the nuclear plant, briefly made into a political issue when a gubernatorial candidate used the image as evidence of environmental contamination, then eaten on live television by Mr. Burns to demonstrate harmlessness. The town watched. Burns chewed. The story moved on. Nobody conducted a follow-up study. Nobody tested the water. Blinky disappeared from the plot as quickly as he had arrived. But Blinky planted something in the show's mythology that would keep growing, quietly, for decades. The three-eyed fish is the first visible external proof that the power plant is doing something to living organisms in the surrounding environment. The show introduces this fact clearly and with apparent intent, then declines to pursue it in any direction that would require a confrontation with its implications. The characters forget, the audience forgets, and the plant keeps running. Season 3 showed a writing staff operating with increasing confidence in the show's capacity to hold complexity. Homer at the bat assembled actual baseball legends for a softball episode and made the celebrity cameos feel like genuine character work rather than extended promotional appearances. Colonel Homer explored with real seriousness the pull Homer feels toward a country singer who finds him genuinely interesting. The specific desire of someone who is frequently overlooked to be seen clearly, even once, by someone outside his immediate household. The episode treated that desire as something worth examining, rather than something to be resolved through a convenient moral lesson delivered in the final act. Season 3 is where the show's philosophy becomes fully visible. The Simpsons was not at its core a show about jokes. It was a show about the gap between who people wanted to be and who they actually were. And it found that gap simultaneously funny and tender, often in the same breath, without letting either quality compromise the other. Season 4 is the season that students of the show argue about most. It contains some of the greatest half hours of American television comedy ever made. Marge versus. The monorail is a piece of comic construction so efficient and so joyful that professional writers still study it. A traveling salesman arrives in Springfield and sells the town on a monorail through the sheer power of a musical number. The episode builds and pays off its absurdity with a precision that makes it look easy, which is the clearest evidence that it was extremely difficult. Last Exit to Springfield, which turns a labor dispute and a dental plan into something that operates simultaneously on every comic and emotional register, is the episode most commonly cited by working television writers as the moment the show reached its peak. Homer the Heretic is a near-perfect examination of religious faith that takes its subject seriously while being genuinely funny. Its depiction of God as someone who operates with specific, engaged attention, rather than as a vague abstraction, is one of the most interesting theological choices a mainstream American program has ever made. And then partway through Season 4, in an episode framed as a clip show, Homer Simpson entered a coma. The show told you he woke up. We will spend considerable time on what the theory argues actually happened. Seasons 5 and 6 continued filling in the mythology. Supporting characters developed histories and interior lives. The show began generating stories from interactions between secondary characters without the main family at the center, and those stories worked because the secondary characters had accumulated enough definition to carry their own weight. Springfield became a place you could believe in because it felt populated in the way real places are, by people whose concerns exist independently of whether the main characters are paying attention. Season 6 ended with the most ambitious narrative gambit the show had attempted: a summer-long mystery, an invitation to the entire viewing audience to participate in solving it. Every person in Springfield with a reason, a gunshot, and a collapsed man on a sundial. America waiting. Season 7 resolved the mystery, officially, and we will examine the resolution with the skepticism it deserves. Season 7 also produced Mother Simpson, which addressed the most significant gap in Homer's personal history and connected that gap to the power plant, to Burns, and to a 3-generation pattern of damage that the Simpson family has been carrying without ever understanding its source. Season 8 is where debates about quality begin in earnest. It contains celebrated individual moments alongside signs of tonal pressure that would gradually transform the show's relationship with its own premises. Different viewers locate the inflection point at different places. The arguments have been running for more than 20 years without producing a consensus. What everyone agrees on is that the Golden Age was real, that during those years from roughly 1990 through 1997, The Simpsons operated at a level that established what American television comedy could be. The benchmark was set. Everything after has been measured against it. The texture of those episodes is difficult to fully convey in summary because it lives in details that require the full context of the episode around them. When Homer, near the end of And Maggie Makes Three, opens a desk drawer at work and reveals that he has covered the management's motivational poster with photographs of Maggie until the only words still visible are, "Do it for her," the moment is quietly devastating. It requires everything the episode built before it to land. It is not a joke. It is a true thing, and the capacity to move between comedy and truth within 30 minutes, without either mode undermining the other, is the specific achievement of the golden age that every subsequent season has been reaching toward, without quite managing to get there again. The writing room during those years was, by most accounts, a genuinely unusual environment. The standard for what worked was real and enforced. A joke had to actually be funny, not in the abstract, not theoretically. Actually funny when said out loud to people, paying attention. And underneath the jokes, always, there had to be something honest about how it feels to be a person trying to make a life in a world that is frequently indifferent to whether you succeed. The Golden Age produced the foundation. Every theory we are going to examine, every mystery we are going to trace, every buried detail that was planted and never quite excavated, all of it was built into the show's structure during the years when the writers were operating at their highest level. The later seasons may have moved away from that foundation. The foundation itself remained solid, and the mysteries written into it remained unresolved, waiting for anyone paying close enough attention to notice they were there. Section 3. The Nuclear Power Plant and the Radiation Theory. The Springfield nuclear power plant sits at the edge of town. Its cooling towers are visible from most of Springfield's residential neighborhoods, rising against the skyline with the permanence of something that has always been there and does not intend to leave. The plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor. It is owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns. It provides the primary electrical power for the entire town. And it is, by any reasonable measurement, one of the most catastrophically mismanaged industrial facilities in the history of fiction. A surprise safety inspection found 342 violations, 342 documented failures to meet basic regulatory standards, at a facility whose entire purpose is to contain and manage radioactive material safely. The estimated cost of bringing the plant into minimum compliance was $56 million. Burns declined to pay it, not because the amount exceeded his resources. Burns is a billionaire many times over, and $56 million represents a trivial fraction of his personal wealth. He declined because addressing the violations would require acknowledging them. Acknowledging them would invite scrutiny. Scrutiny would require someone to start asking questions about what those violations had already done to the people living downwind. The violations are not administrative paperwork issues. The show depicts them with specificity across various episodes over the years. Radioactive waste discharged directly into local waterways. Radioactive material found on children's playgrounds. Plutonium, used as a paperweight on a desk inside the facility. Structural cracks in the cooling towers addressed at some unknown point by a person applying chewing gum to the affected areas. Luminous rats in the lower passages of the building, glowing with the quiet persistence of organisms that have absorbed far more than their biology was designed to handle. And the show mentions, almost as an aside, that human skeletons have been found in the basement. Human skeletons. In the basement of a working nuclear facility. The show does not explain who those people were. It does not suggest an investigation. It does not return to the detail. It presents the bones as information and moves on. No character asks a question. No inquiry begins. The skeletons are simply a fact of the building, noted and filed alongside the chewing gum cooling towers and the luminous rats, treated with exactly the same casual disregard. The person whose job is to prevent this facility from poisoning the surrounding community is Homer Simpson. The show's own creator has described Homer as possessing an IQ of 55. A season 12 episode revealed that Homer's reduced cognitive capacity is at least partly attributable to a crayon lodged in his brain since childhood, a physical object pressing against neural tissue for decades, limiting his capacity for sustained complex thought. Homer sleeps at his workstation. He has eaten donuts during active meltdown warnings. On one occasion, he threw a donut into the reactor core to test a theory about whether radiation might cause the pastry to increase in size. This is the person standing between Springfield and catastrophe. He has been standing there, in this capacity, for 36 years. The first visible mutant in Springfield appeared in Season 2. Blinky, the three-eyed fish, was pulled from a river near the plant. Within the show's narrative, the fish briefly became a political symbol. A gubernatorial candidate used it as evidence that Burns was actively poisoning Springfield's ecosystem. Burns ate the fish on live television to demonstrate that the fish was harmless. The community accepted this demonstration. Nobody asked for documentation. Nobody insisted on independent scientific testing. The story moved past the fish and onto other matters. Nobody tested the water. Nobody conducted a follow-up study. Nobody asked the question the fish makes almost impossible to avoid. If the contamination gives fish a third eye, what is it doing to the people drinking from that same river? The answer has been visible in the show's visual design since its earliest episodes, hidden in plain sight, so consistent and so pervasive that it stopped registering as unusual long ago. We look at it in every episode and we do not see it, because we have normalized it the same way Springfield normalizes everything that should require examination. Consider the residents. Homer Simpson, massive overbite, bulging eyes, 4 fingers on each hand, which is not a human configuration, skull geometry that does not correspond to any known biological category, an IQ the show itself categorizes as a clinical disability, and a body that absorbs physical trauma at a rate entirely inconsistent with human biology under normal conditions. He has been shot, struck by lightning, fallen from heights that should be fatal, been hit by vehicles at speed, been buried under heavy objects, survived explosions. Every time, he walks away. His healing rate is not human. His pain tolerance is not human. He has worked in direct proximity to an active nuclear reactor for the entirety of his adult life. Marge Simpson. The same bulging eyes, the same 4 fingers, hair that extends directly upward in a tower she has maintained in an identical configuration for 36 years without any visible structural support or cosmetic product. Marge was employed at the nuclear plant during one period of the show's run. She was exposed to the same facility, the same violations, the same material. All 3 of her children were conceived and born after both parents had already spent years inside Springfield's contaminated environment. Bart, Lisa, Maggie, all born in Springfield, all raised in Springfield, drinking the same water, breathing the same air, living under the shadow of those cooling towers every day of their lives, each one displaying physical characteristics that do not appear in populations living outside contaminated environments. Spiky hair that maintains its shape without product, overbites, bulging eyes, yellow skin that covers every Springfield resident and no one else. Here is the detail that gives the radiation theory its precision and makes it difficult to dismiss. When characters arrive in Springfield from outside, as celebrity guests, as visitors established as living elsewhere, as characters with no connection to the contamination zone, they look different. Not slightly different, fundamentally different. Their proportions are more natural, Their features more closely resemble standard human anatomy. They have 5 fingers. Their skin is not yellow. Their eyes are proportioned differently from the eyes of people who live inside Springfield. The standard explanation is that this is an artistic choice. Recurring characters are drawn in the Simpsons style, and guests sometimes look different to stand out visually. That is just how the show works. But within the logic of the show's own universe, there is an observable, consistent, physical difference between people who live in the contamination zone and people who do not. The residents look mutated according to a specific and reproducible set of criteria. The visitors look like normal people, and the criteria that distinguish the two groups are exactly the criteria you would expect to find if the contamination were the variable. Even the animals. Santa's little helper, the Simpson family greyhound, has the same bulging eyes and exaggerated proportions as his owners. The show's wildlife is demonstrably affected by the plant's environmental output. The show told you this directly with the three-eyed fish, as clear a mutation indicator as visual storytelling can produce, and then expects you to believe that identical contamination has had no effect on the humans living in the same environment, drinking the same water, breathing the same air. Burns knows. The show establishes this across multiple episodes. Burns understands radiation and its effects on biological systems with an intimacy that nobody else in Springfield possesses, because he is personally dependent on managing those effects in his own body. In the Season 8 episode The Springfield Files, Homer sees a figure in the woods and concludes it must be an alien. The FBI investigates. Mulder and Scully appear. The town panics, and the eventual reveal is that the figure is not an alien at all. It is Mr. Burns. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment of such radiological and chemical intensity that his body emits a visible green glow afterward. The treatment maintains his biological function for exactly 1 more week. Without it, he dies within days. After each session, Burns walks out of the medical facility in a dazed and euphoric state, wandering through the surrounding woods, literally glowing in the dark. And the people of Springfield, upon encountering a glowing humanoid figure emerging from the forest, determined that the most reasonable explanation was extraterrestrial visitation, not radiation, not the power plant visible from most of their windows. An alien from outer space. Consider what that tells you about how deep the collective avoidance runs in Springfield. The evidence for radiation effects on living organisms is visible from every window facing the plant, and the population's first instinct, confronted with a new piece of that evidence, is to reach for the most remote possible explanation available. Burns is not merely profiting from radiation while remaining unaffected by it. His body requires it. He has been so thoroughly altered by a century of proximity to nuclear material that normal cellular maintenance is no longer possible without external radiation input on a scheduled basis. The plant is not just his business. It is his life support system. Without the weekly treatments, he dies. The contamination he releases into Springfield's environment and the treatment he uses to maintain his own survival are part of the same system. This leads to the theory's most disturbing inference. Burns understands what radiation does to biological systems at a level nobody else in Springfield can access, because he has been managing it in his own body for more than a century. He runs the plant. He knows what goes in, what comes out, and where it ends up. He knows what the three-eyed fish means. He knows what the yellow skin means. He knows what 4 fingers instead of 5 means. And he continues. Year after year, decade after decade, when German investors briefly purchased the plant, their first act was firing Homer. They recognized immediately that a genuinely competent safety inspector would be catastrophic for a facility operating as far outside compliance as this one. They assessed the cost of bringing it to code and nearly went bankrupt from the estimate. They sold the plant back to Burns as quickly as they could. Burns bought it back and rehired Homer the same day. A real safety inspector would shut that plant down. Homer ensures the violations continue. The radiation keeps leaking, the water stays poisoned, and Burns maintains his monopoly over the town's power supply and, by extension, over a population too cognitively compromised by chronic exposure to recognize what is being done to them. The Simpsons movie forced this contamination into the center of the plot in a way that could not be ignored even by the most casual viewer. The pollution around Springfield reaches a point so extreme that the EPA, operating within the show as a real federal agency, determines the town must be physically sealed under a glass dome to prevent the contamination from spreading beyond its current boundaries. The United States government, within the show's universe, classified Springfield as an environmental hazard and chose total containment as the only adequate response. And every resident who has been drinking the water and breathing the air and raising their children in the shadow of those towers for decades was inside the dome when it went up, sealed in with the thing that had been slowly altering them for as long as they could remember. Now consider Homer's crayon again. Season 12 revealed that Homer once had it removed. Without it, his cognitive function expanded dramatically. He became intelligent, articulate, capable of understanding his circumstances with a clarity he had never previously experienced. He saw the plant for what it was. He saw Burns for what he was. He saw his life clearly for the first time. He had the crayon put back. He chose the fog because the clarity was unbearable. But the question the show asks and then retreats from, how did a crayon lodge in a child's brain without anyone noticing? Homer saw Springfield doctors throughout his life. He received routine medical care. Not one physician, across the entirety of his life, discovered a foreign object embedded in their patient's skull. Either the medical establishment in Springfield is comprehensively incompetent, or someone knew and made a decision not to remove it. And if Burns's influence extends into the healthcare infrastructure of the town he effectively owns, then Homer's crayon is not an accident. It is an arrangement. A man kept intellectually limited, employed in a safety-critical role he cannot perform competently, at a facility that requires exactly that incompetent oversight to maintain its current operations without external interference. The radiation theory does not explain one specific mystery about The Simpsons. It explains all of them simultaneously. The characters do not age because their biology has been altered at the cellular level by decades of chronic low-level exposure. The town resets because the population's cognitive function has been compromised in ways that make sustained memory unreliable. Homer survives things that should kill him because his body has adapted to radiation in ways that provide extraordinary physical resilience, even as they devastate his capacity for complex thought. Burns stays alive because he has spent a century engineering the infrastructure required to manage his own radiation dependency, with resources that no other Springfield resident can access. And nobody in Springfield questions any of this because the same contamination that mutated their bodies also damaged the neural machinery responsible for critical analysis. The part of the mind that asks why and keeps asking until the answer makes sense. Springfield is not a quirky cartoon town. It is a contamination zone. Its residents are not eccentric characters. They are a symptomatic population. The nuclear plant dominating their skyline and providing their electricity and employing their neighbors and poisoning their water is not a background joke. It is the cause. Every yellow face, every bulging eye, every impossible recovery, every forgotten disaster, every reset, every unexplained mystery the show introduces and leaves unresolved. All of it leads back to the same cracked cooling tower, leaking the same invisible material, into the same water supply, feeding the same damaged minds that cannot work out why their fish have 3 eyes and their children have 4 fingers, and their neighbor glows in the dark and none of it has ever seemed worth asking about. The plant is not just part of the show, it is the engine of everything the show contains. And nobody in Springfield will ever understand that, because the plant already made sure they cannot. Section 4. Homer's coma theory. Set everything from the last section aside for a moment, because there is a theory that does not so much contradict the radiation reading as nest inside it, providing a frame that makes it simultaneously more and less unsettling depending on where you choose to rest your attention. What if the radiation theory is entirely correct in every detail, but accurate only inside the mind of a man who has been unconscious since April of 1993? On April 1st of that year, the 18th episode of Season 4 aired. So, it's come to this, a Simpsons clip show. The premise was simple. Bart plays a series of escalating April Fool's pranks on Homer, culminating in taking one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and placing it inside an industrial paint shaker. When Homer opens the can, the resulting explosion is violent enough to send him to the hospital. Lying in his hospital bed recovering, Homer notices a vending machine across the room. He wants a candy bar. He gets up, crosses to the machine, and the machine tips over and falls on him. He flatlines. He enters a clinically verified coma that the episode establishes lasts 7 weeks. The episode ends with Homer apparently waking up. Bart, weeping at his bedside, confesses that the escalation was his fault, that he had caused his father's hospitalization. Homer springs awake and immediately begins strangling his son. The family laughs. The show tells you he woke up, but before the episode concludes, one more detail is delivered. During the coma, Homer lost 5% of his brain function, permanently destroyed, not recoverable. 5% of Homer's mind is simply gone. And Homer's response to learning he has suffered irreversible neurological damage is to laugh, even though he says, within the same scene, that he does not understand why he is laughing. The family finds this charming. Nobody expresses alarm. The credits roll and the show continues for 32 more years, as if this were entirely unremarkable. Unless Homer never woke up at all. This is the Homer coma theory, the most widely discussed, most carefully examined, and most internally consistent fan interpretation in the show's history. The core proposition is simple. Homer did not regain consciousness in April 1993. Every episode since that date, every story, every character development, every guest appearance, every impossible event is a dream generated by the comatose mind of a man lying in Springfield General Hospital, slowly losing neural function while his family sits at his bedside, waiting for something that may never come. The evidence accumulates through observation rather than any single dramatic proof. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a grounded show. Not realistic in a strict sense. It was always a cartoon, and cartoon logic always applied, but grounded in the sense that its stories were rooted in recognizable human experience. Homer tries to quit drinking and struggles with it genuinely. Marge considers whether she might be drawn to someone outside her marriage and treats the question seriously. Lisa forms an intense attachment to a substitute teacher who treats her intelligence as real rather than inconvenient. Bart faces academic failure with consequences that feel substantial. These are situations that actual families navigate. The comedy came from the gap between aspiration and reality, but the gap was human-sized and relatable to the people watching. After the coma, the gap becomes something different entirely. Homer goes to space. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer joins a secret society. Homer discovers his mother has been a federal fugitive for 27 years. Homer meets God directly on 2 separate occasions. Homer holds hundreds of different jobs across the show's later seasons, each one abandoned and forgotten between episodes, as completely as if it had never existed. Homer travels to dozens of countries. Homer befriends celebrities. The escalation is so consistent and so dramatic that the show's tonal shift has been the subject of continuous debate for more than 20 years, with most participants agreeing it happened, but disagreeing about exactly when and exactly what caused it. The coma theory makes a precise claim about that shift. The Simpsons did not decline in quality after season 4. Homer's brain declined. What reads as escalating surrealism in the later seasons is the progressive deterioration of a comatose mind generating a dream that has been running for an increasingly long time. The plots detach from plausible reality because the mind generating them is becoming more detached from reality. The consequences stop sticking between episodes because a dreaming brain cannot maintain continuity across cycles the way waking experience does. Homer can survive anything because his body is in a hospital bed and only his mind is in Springfield, and his mind cannot kill him because his mind is the one telling the story. Now consider a detail from 6 months before the coma episode. In Homer the Heretic, the season 4 premiere, Homer has a direct conversation with God. Within the episode's internal logic, it is a genuine encounter, not a hallucination, not a dream sequence. And God tells Homer something specific. He says that Homer will learn the meaning of life. But not yet. He says Homer's time is coming. 6 months later, Homer is in a coma. Under the coma theory, that conversation was not a joke about theology. God was telling Homer that his waking life was nearing its end. His time, his conscious time, his time as a present and experiencing subject in the world, was coming. It arrived 6 months later. And everything the show presents as following from that moment is the dream the departure produced. The aging problem is where the coma theory offers its most complete and most emotionally affecting explanation. Nobody in The Simpsons ages. Bart has been 10 for 36 years. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge are frozen in their mid-30s. The show uses a floating timeline. The characters are perpetually the same age regardless of real-world time passing, and most viewers accept this as a practical necessity of long-running animation. But the coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went unconscious in April 1993. His children do not grow older because his unconscious mind cannot imagine them growing up. He was not there to see it happen. His wife does not change because the last image his sleeping mind holds of her is from before the vending machine fell. His friends remain static because his memory of them crystallized at the moment he lost access to the world. Homer's coma dream preserves everything exactly as it was at the moment he lost it. Because that is what the theory proposes comas do to the mind. They freeze your experience of the world at the last moment you had access to it. And then the mind constructs simulations of what might have been, using only the material it had when the door closed. Every celebrity who appears in Springfield in the show's later seasons is, in this reading, a voice Homer absorbed through the fog of unconsciousness, sound from a hospital room television, fragments of conversations at his bedside, cultural references drifting into the room from the waking world, caught by a sleeping mind and woven into the dream. That is why the celebrity appearances multiply as the seasons progress. Not because Springfield became a magnet for famous people. Because Homer's coma brain is absorbing more ambient stimuli over time and integrating them into the simulation with decreasing editorial control, the way dreams in very long sleep cycles begin incorporating more external input. The show acknowledged the theory obliquely in its 34th season. An episode contained what was presented as a leaked, deleted scene in which Homer wakes from a long coma to reveal that every absurd episode had been a dream. The show immediately framed this as a hoax, a scene planted by unnamed hackers, not real, not canonical. A joke that the show was making at its own expense. But they made it, they animated it, they voiced it, they produced it in full, and then they said it was a joke. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory directly in 2015 and dismissed it as fan speculation. But he did not explain the tonal shift. He did not explain why nobody ages. He did not address the God conversation 6 months before the coma. He did not account for why the show has become progressively more surreal and detached from recognizable reality with each passing season, which is exactly the pattern you would expect from a dreaming brain operating for an increasingly long time with decreasing maintenance. He said it was not true and the conversation moved on. The fans did not move on, because the theory does something that no official explanation has managed to do. It makes every structural feature of the show coherent at the same time. The aging freeze, the escalating impossibility, the celebrity flood, the consequences that evaporate between episodes, Homer's ability to survive anything and recover from everything. All of it becomes meaningful, rather than arbitrary. If Homer's body is in a hospital and only his mind is in Springfield, and his mind cannot end the story because ending the story means the dreamer has to wake up, waking up means finding out how much time has passed, how old his children really are now, whether Marge is still there or whether she eventually had to make a different decision, whether anyone is still sitting by his bed or whether the vigil ended years ago and nobody told him. If the coma theory is right, The Simpsons is not a comedy. It is a sustained portrait of grief and longing. Homer's deepest wish is uncomplicated. He wants his family. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be 10 years old and aggravating and his. He wants Lisa to play her saxophone on a Friday evening. He wants Maggie to be small enough to hold. He wants the house on Evergreen Terrace, and the cold beer, and all of them together. In the coma, those things do not end. The dream preserves everything. His children remain exactly as he last saw them. His wife is unchanged. His life is held in suspension at the moment before the door closed. Homer's coma is not a nightmare. It is the only version of heaven a man like Homer Simpson would ever know to ask for. Every episode since April 1993, if the theory is right, is a love letter from an unconscious father to the family he can no longer reach. Every reset, every time the credits roll and Springfield begins again fresh. Every time the impossible happens and Homer survives it and finds his way home, it is not lazy writing. It is a brain refusing to let the story end. Because ending the story means the dreamer has to wake up. And waking up means finding out what time has done to everyone he loves. Section 5. Who really shot Mr. Burns? Before you say Maggie, stay with me. We know what the show told us. Season 7, Episode 1. Baby did it, case closed, move on. Except the case was never really closed. Because the evidence does not hold together the way the official answer requires it to. Let us go back to the beginning. Season 6, Episode 25. Who Shot Mr. Burns? Part 1. The Summer of 1995. The Simpsons attempted something no animated show had tried before. A genuine whodunit, designed with enough care that the show's creators felt confident inviting the entire viewing audience to try to solve it. Fox promoted the mystery as a cultural event across the summer. America's Most Wanted produced a special, treating the fictional shooting as if it were a real unsolved case. For one summer, the show was a national puzzle. The setup: Burns had systematically dismantled the lives of nearly everyone in Springfield. He stole an oil well from beneath Springfield Elementary, gutting the school's budget. He financially destroyed Moe's Tavern. He created a geological disruption that collapsed the retirement castle. He injured Santa's little helper, and for his finale, he built a device to block sunlight over Springfield entirely, forcing every resident to purchase electricity from his plant because the alternative was darkness. When Smithers protested, Burns fired him. By the end of Part 1, every person in Springfield had a specific reason to want Burns dead. Every single one. Homer, because Burns had never managed to learn his name despite years of direct employment, an oversight that had driven Homer to a documented breaking point. Bart and Lisa, because the school lost its funding. Grandpa, because the retirement home was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, because he lost his livelihood. Tito Puente, because Burns cut the music program. Moe, because his bar was financially ruined. Smithers, freshly fired, spiraling. The town gathered. Burns was confronted. Burns was shot. He staggered to the sundial at the center of town and collapsed, his hands landing on two letters, W and S, or from his own perspective, M and S. He was carried away by ambulance. The screen went black. America had all summer to think about it. Part 2 aired in September 1995. The investigation played out as comedy procedural. Chief Wiggum and the Springfield police fumbled through the evidence with characteristic incompetence. Smithers confessed immediately. Then his confession collapsed when it emerged he had been blackout drunk at the time and had actually shot someone else entirely, a different victim in a different location. Wrong crime. Wrong night. Wrong person. Suspects were eliminated one by one. Skinner had an alibi. Moe had an alibi. Tito Puente provided what the show itself described as the greatest alibi in television history. A complete musical number explaining that he had channeled his rage into artistic expression rather than violence. The investigation stalled until police found an eyelash on Burns's suit. DNA confirmed it came from a Simpson. Homer's fingerprints were on the gun. Homer had the clearest and most documented personal motive in town. Homer was arrested. He was about to be convicted. Burns woke from his coma. He identified the shooter, Maggie. According to Burns's account, he had encountered Maggie in the parking lot after the town meeting. He had attempted to take her lollipop. In the struggle, his gun fell from its holster. Maggie picked it up. The gun discharged. Burns was shot. Case closed. Except the contest. Fox had invited viewers across the country to submit their guesses for who pulled the trigger, with the prize of being animated into a future episode. Thousands of entries arrived. According to the DVD commentary, not a single person in the randomly selected sample of entries guessed Maggie correctly. Nobody won. The prize went to a randomly selected entrant who had not identified the right answer and received a cash payment instead of the animated appearance. The writers knew of exactly one person who had posted the correct answer online on the night of the original broadcast, using a college internet account that was inactive by the time producers tried to locate them. They were never found. The show's creators told the public the mystery was solvable from the evidence in Part 1, built a national contest around that promise, and when the answer came, essentially nobody had arrived there through the available evidence. Either the clues were insufficient, or the answer did not logically follow from them in the way the promotion had implied. Look at the physical evidence. Burns falls on the sundial. His hands land on M and S. The show interprets this as M for Maggie, S for Simpson. But Burns stated explicitly, within the episode, that the positioning of his hands was not deliberate. He fell and happened to land that way. The central piece of physical evidence the show uses to justify its answer was characterized by the victim himself as coincidental. The most prominent clue in the mystery is meaningless, according to the only person who could confirm its intention: the gun. Burns carried it in a holster that is visible, in the episode, to already be empty before the attack. The gun had left his person before the shooting occurred. Whoever shot Burns used his own weapon. This means the shooter was not someone who brought their own gun to the meeting. Most of the armed suspects at the confrontation had brought weapons precisely because they were angry enough to have considered violence. The person who shot Burns was someone who had not planned to shoot anyone, who encountered Burns's weapon by chance and acted on impulse. A baby finding a fallen gun fits this description. So does every other unarmed person in the crowd that night, which is a substantial number of people. Burns's words immediately before being shot, "Oh, it's you!" He recognized his attacker. He was not startled. He was not frightened. He greeted the person with the specific, calm familiarity of encountering someone known, not someone feared, not someone expected to be threatening. Does Mr. Burns know Maggie Simpson? The show establishes no meaningful prior relationship between them. Burns cannot consistently remember Homer's name, and Homer has worked for him for years in a direct reporting capacity. The idea that Burns would see a 1-year-old baby in a parking lot and respond with the quiet recognition of encountering a known person does not correspond to anything we know about either of them. In Season 18, Homer states directly on camera that he was the one who shot Mr. Burns. He simply says it. Nobody investigates. Nobody reopens anything. The show treats a confession to attempted murder as a passing line that does not require response. Either Homer is lying for attention, which is consistent with his character and cannot be ruled out, or the verdict was wrong and Homer knows it because he is the person who actually fired the gun. If Homer shot Burns, then Maggie did not. A baby was blamed for her father's crime. The strongest alternate theory centers on Marge. She watched Burns dismantle her children's school, injure the family dog, and steal sunlight from her community. The theory notes that Burns had previously developed an obsessive infatuation with Marge in an earlier episode, and argues that this explains why Burns, upon waking from his coma, chose not to name her as the person responsible. He protected her. He regained consciousness, saw the investigation closing in on the wrong person, and allowed it. Maggie was the ideal alternative suspect. Too young to be prosecuted, too young to deny the accusation, too young to face any consequence. Chief Wiggum says this explicitly in the episode. No jury in the world would convict a baby. Maggie was the perfect outcome for someone who needed the truth buried, an infant who could absorb the verdict without any lasting harm. The final shot of Part 2 shows Maggie alone in the room after everyone has left. She checks carefully that no observer remains. Then she moves her pacifier in a motion that mirrors pulling a trigger. The show intends this as confirmation. Maggie did it and she knows she did it. But the same gesture reads differently if you approach it without the answer already fixed. A baby who watched someone else fire a gun. Replaying the moment in private because the moment had an emotional charge her mind has not finished processing. Babies mimic the adults around them. That is a foundational behavior of early childhood development. Maggie watching someone shoot Burns and reenacting the motion later is entirely consistent with normal infant behavior. It is not confession, it is memory. The alternate Smithers ending was fully animated, fully voiced, fully produced. The show considered this resolution seriously enough to complete it. The evidence was adjusted after the answer was chosen, not before. The mystery was built backward from a conclusion the writers reached through other means than following the clues. In a town where every person had a specific motive, where dozens of people attended the confrontation with weapons, where the victim had literally taken the sun away from the community, only one shot was fired. From only one person, who could never be held accountable. Springfield is not a town known for restraint. These people riot over minor disputes. They form mobs at the slightest provocation. But when the richest man in town blocked out the sky, only one shot came from the crowd. Either Springfield's population was significantly more composed than the show has ever depicted them elsewhere, or the shooting was not as spontaneous as the official account suggests. Maybe it was planned. Maybe someone with access to Burns's schedule, knowledge of where his gun was kept, and enough understanding of the investigation's eventual course to know that a certain suspect could never be convicted. The official answer is Maggie Simpson. The writers committed to it. The DVD commentary treats it as settled, but the contest, nobody won. The clues Burns called coincidental. The fully produced alternate endings. Homer's unexamined confession. The final image of Maggie replaying the event alone. Springfield's greatest mystery was not solved. It was closed. And in this town, those have always been very different things. Section 6. The immortality of Mr. Burns. How is Mr. Burns still alive? This is not rhetorical, and it is not a question about cartoon logic. Within the established internal continuity of The Simpsons, Charles Montgomery Burns is a biological impossibility. His age has been stated, implied, suggested, and contradicted across dozens of episodes spread across 3 decades, but every version of the timeline places his birth somewhere in the late 19th century. He has described personal memories from before 1900. He has spoken of events from the early 20th century as first-hand experience rather than inherited history. He attended Yale in an era that would place him at an age currently exceeding any documented human lifespan by a comfortable margin. He served in World War II. He had a personal relationship with Howard Hughes. He has described the Gilded Age not as something he read about, but as something he lived through. By the most conservative calculation, Burns is well over 100 years old. By the most generous reading of the show's internal chronology, he might be pushing 140. And he does not merely exist in that condition. He functions. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation with operational sophistication. He manipulates municipal politics with precision and patience. He conceives and executes long-range schemes requiring genuine fluency with modern financial instruments, modern technology, and modern legal frameworks. He is always thinking several moves ahead of the people around him. He is, by any objective measure, the most strategically capable character in Springfield. His body is fragile, his physical strength is nearly negligible, but his mind operates at the highest level of any character in the show's universe. And he has been operating at that level for longer than human biology should allow. The mechanism of his survival is addressed most directly in the Springfield Files. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment of such radiological and chemical intensity that it causes his body to emit a visible green glow. The treatment maintains his biological function for exactly 1 more week. Without it, he dies within days. His life is maintained through scheduled servicing, with 0 margin for error. Miss 1 appointment and Burns does not decline gradually. He collapses. He dies. The maintenance is not something that can be deferred. The treatment involves radiation. The man who owns a nuclear power plant, whose facility has been discharging radioactive material into Springfield's environment for decades, is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to remain alive. Burns is not simply profiting from radiation while remaining immune to its effects. His body requires it. The plant is not just his business empire. It is his biological infrastructure. This provides an explanation for what the show presents as the most remarkable fact about Burns's medical condition. In one of the series' most frequently quoted scenes, a doctor informs Burns that he has contracted every disease known to medical science. Not sequentially, simultaneously, every illness present in his body at the same moment, but existing in a state of perfect equilibrium, each condition canceling out every other condition. The doctor uses the term Three Stooges syndrome, comparing the situation to 3 people attempting to pass through a doorway at the same time. None of them can get through because they are all blocking each other. Burns is the sickest man in America, but functionally unkillable, because everything attempting to kill him is being neutralized by everything else attempting to kill him. The radiation theory says Burns's weekly treatments are maintaining this equilibrium. The controlled external radiation input delivered on the precise schedule that Smithers manages with obsessive attention keeps every disease in exact stasis. No single condition gaining sufficient momentum to break through and take hold. Miss 1 treatment and the equilibrium collapses. Every disease in his body accelerates simultaneously. He dies of everything at once within the week. It is not medicine in any conventional sense. It is nuclear maintenance. Burns's body is a reactor, and the weekly treatments adjust the control mechanisms to prevent a cascade failure that would be instantly fatal. Smithers understands this completely and understands it alone. His devotion to Burns is often discussed in terms of affection, professional loyalty, or the complicated emotional attachment the show depicts between them. But there is a practical dimension the show rarely states explicitly. Smithers keeps Burns alive through logistical competence. His management of the treatment schedule is not ancillary to his role. It is the central function his presence serves. Without Smithers managing that schedule, Burns misses a treatment. The equilibrium collapses. Burns dies within days. Smithers knows this. The knowledge is one of the structural foundations of their entire relationship. Not just the emotional complexity, but the stark awareness that his absence is a death sentence for the man he has organized his life around. Burns's connection to historical events adds another dimension to the immortality question. He has personal memories spanning more than a century of American history. He attended Yale. He served in the war in a capacity the show describes as morally ambiguous at minimum. He retained a $1 trillion bill he stole from the United States government during that war and kept it hidden for decades afterward. He knew Howard Hughes personally. He has described the Gilded Age with the specificity of direct experience. His family wealth predates the Industrial Revolution, and the Burns family fortune represents one of the oldest and most continuously powerful dynasties in the show's version of American history. The kind of wealth that builds infrastructure and then charges everyone else to use it. The kind of wealth that exists so far above the normal mechanisms of legal accountability that accountability becomes theoretical rather than practical. Burns inherited this dynasty and has extended it for more than a century through a combination of strategic ruthlessness and the biological intervention his resources make possible. Whether his ancestors employed similar methods to account for their own unusual longevity is something the show declines to address directly. Burns has come close to dying more often than almost any other character in the series. He has been shot. He has been hospitalized dozens of times. He has collapsed, fallen, been attacked, been abandoned in the wilderness, been subjected to conditions that would rapidly end a normal person. Each time, he comes back. Not through cartoon resilience of the type Homer demonstrates. Homer endures damage and heals because the show needs him to continue. Burns comes back through infrastructure, through money, through the machinery of accumulated wealth that ensures someone with the right expertise and the right equipment is always positioned to intervene when his body fails. Homer's survivability is passive. Burns's is engineered, deliberately, continuously, at enormous expense that Burns's fortune makes trivial. Every dollar Burns has ever accumulated, every institution he has ever compromised, every politician he has ever purchased, every physician he has ever retained, it all serves one ultimate purpose: maintain the treatments, keep the equilibrium stable, keep the reactor running. Because if Burns dies, the system he spent a century constructing has to answer for what it has done. And Burns's survival is entangled with Springfield's survival in ways that neither party can cleanly exit. The town's economy depends on the plant. The plant depends on Burns. Burns depends on the treatments. The treatments depend on the infrastructure Burns's accumulated wealth provides. A closed loop, sustaining itself indefinitely. Springfield cannot remove Burns without dismantling the economic foundation the town depends on. Burns cannot die without his empire becoming subject to examination by people with the authority to dismantle it. The arrangement sustains both parties, whether either party chose it deliberately or not. Burns is too expensive to die, and Springfield will keep paying the cost for as long as Burns keeps the lights on, which, if the treatment schedule holds, appears to be without a foreseeable end. Section 7. Maggie Simpson, the quietest genius. Maggie Simpson has not spoken a meaningful sentence in 36 years of broadcast television. She does not walk with consistent reliability. Her primary mode of communication is facial expression and the occasional pointed look over the top of a pacifier she has been holding in place since December 1989. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for her entire existence. And in that time, without a word, she has accomplished more than every other member of her family. She shot a billionaire. She organized and led a daycare rebellion against an authoritarian administrator. She has saved her family from multiple life-threatening situations through interventions that required planning and execution rather than luck. She has been formally assessed and found to possess intelligence that the instruments designed to measure it cannot accurately capture. She has demonstrated sustained problem-solving capacity that would be remarkable in adults with decades more development behind them. Through all of it, she has maintained absolute silence. Begin with the shooting, because it is the act that defines her in the public consciousness, even though it is arguably the least interesting thing about her. Whatever the truth is about who fired the gun, what matters for understanding Maggie is the aftermath. A baby was officially identified as the person who shot the most powerful man in Springfield. The investigation concluded. The verdict was delivered. Yes, this infant committed an act of violence against a grown man, and there is nothing to be done about it, because the criminal justice system has no mechanism for prosecuting someone who is not developmentally capable of understanding the charge. Case closed. Story over. Everybody go home. Then, look at the final shot of that episode. After everyone else has left the room, Maggie is alone. She scans the space with deliberate care, checking that no observer remains, and then she moves her pacifier in a motion that exactly mirrors pulling a trigger. That sequence requires situational awareness. It requires memory of what happened and what it meant. It requires understanding that certain actions have consequences when performed publicly, and that those consequences can be avoided by performing the action only in private. It requires the judgment to wait until the coast is clear. These are not capacities associated with one-year-old children in any developmental literature. Consider The Longest Daycare, the theatrical short released in 2012, screened before Ice Age, Continental Drift in cinemas. It was nominated for an Academy Award. 7 minutes of Maggie navigating a genuine crisis through intelligence that would be impressive in any context. At a daycare facility run with rigid efficiency, Maggie encounters a caterpillar about to become a butterfly. She wants to protect it. A bully baby named Gerald wants to destroy it. What follows is a miniature action film in which Maggie outmaneuvers the bully, the entire daycare staff, and the facility's physical security systems to save the butterfly and release it safely. She does this without speaking a word, through observation, rapid situational analysis, multi-step planning, and the kind of adaptive problem-solving that most adults struggle with in high-pressure circumstances. She reads the environment at the start and updates her reading as conditions change. She identifies threats and categorizes them by urgency and type. She develops approaches and revises them in real time when they encounter obstacles. Every choice she makes is the correct one. Every decision she executes is optimized for the available conditions. Her body cannot keep pace with her mind. She falls, she stumbles. She crawls when running is required because her motor development has not yet caught up with her cognitive capacity. But her judgment is flawless. Her thinking compensates for every physical limitation her developmental stage imposes. She succeeds because she is smarter than every other agent in the situation, including every adult present. The show has formally tested Maggie's intelligence in several episodes, with results that vary in specifics but are consistent in implication. She is not a normal baby. Whatever is occurring in her mind registers at levels beyond what instruments designed for her developmental stage are built to measure. The show notes this and moves forward quickly, treating it as a passing joke, because that is how the show has always treated Maggie. As a punchline rather than a subject, what is most interesting about Maggie is not her intelligence in isolation. It is the strategic relationship between her intelligence and her silence. Her first word, Daddy, was voiced in a single moment by Elizabeth Taylor in what amounted to a special occasion appearance. It happened once and was never built upon. In 36 years of broadcast, Maggie has not developed language in any functional sense. She is surrounded by people who express themselves constantly, at volume, without restraint. Homer narrates his own experience as he moves through it. Marge manages her anxieties and her hopes out loud in running commentary. Bart provokes and argues and performs. Lisa lectures and debates and plays music when words are insufficient. The Simpson household is a continuous wall of language. In the center of it, Maggie watches. The theory that Maggie's silence is a deliberate choice made by a mind intelligent enough to recognize the strategic value of not being noticed rests on one central observation. Look at what happens to visibly intelligent people in this family. Lisa Simpson is a genius by any measure the show applies. She demonstrates cognitive capacity that exceeds everyone in her immediate environment and most of the adults in Springfield. She is consistently the most analytically capable person in most rooms she occupies. And the consequences of this have been, consistently, isolation, dismissal, mockery, and the specific exhaustion of someone who sees things clearly and cannot make anyone else see them. Lisa's intelligence is both her defining characteristic and the primary source of her suffering in Springfield, because she deploys it openly and announces it visibly, and the response from the world around her is to ensure she understands how little that matters here. Maggie has had a front-row seat to this dynamic since the day she was born. She has watched her sister fight every day for recognition and receive resistance. She has observed the most capable person in the household being consistently undervalued by a community that rewards simplicity and finds intelligence inconvenient. She has learned the lesson that experience provides, which is the lesson Lisa refuses to learn, that intelligence in Springfield is a liability when it is visible and an asset when it is hidden. Maggie learned the opposite lesson from her sister. Lisa learned to keep fighting regardless of cost. Maggie learned that silence is power, that invisibility is a form of armor, that the less attention you attract, the more freedom you retain to act when action matters. Every time Maggie does something remarkable, the family does not notice. The community does not notice. Burns was shot and the investigation focused on every adult in Springfield before anyone gave sustained attention to the infant, because infants are not considered in these contexts. The daycare rebellion succeeded because nobody monitors babies closely enough to observe them organizing. Every heroic act, every demonstration of intelligence, every moment where Maggie determines the outcome of a situation the adults could not manage, it happens below the threshold of sustained attention. And Maggie has kept it there deliberately, by performing exactly what everyone expects a 1-year-old to be: quiet, passive, helpless, dependent on the adults around her. She is none of those things. She is the opposite of all of them. Connect this to the radiation theory. If Springfield's contamination produces mutations that manifest differently across different people, Maggie represents the opposite extreme from Homer. Homer's exposure diminished his cognitive capacity to clinical disability. Maggie's amplified hers to levels that formal assessment cannot capture. Same source, same family, same contaminated water and irradiated air. Where the father's brain was diminished, the youngest daughter's was given something that exceeds the upper range of any available measuring instrument. Homer and Maggie are the two poles of the same radioactive reality. He is what happens when mutation takes something away. She is what happens when it gives something extraordinary. If the coma theory is accurate, Maggie's genius takes on a different quality entirely. An unconscious father who cannot watch his youngest child grow up makes her extraordinary in the dream he constructs, gives her the capacity to protect herself in a world where he cannot be present, gives her intelligence sufficient to handle whatever comes. Because a dreaming father who cannot reach his youngest child needs to believe, at some level below conscious articulation, that the child will be okay without him. In this reading, Maggie's genius is not a mutation, it is a father's prayer. But if Springfield is real within its own logic, the darker reading holds. Maggie does not speak, because speaking would reveal what she is. She does not demonstrate her intelligence publicly because demonstrated intelligence is punished here, as Lisa's entire existence proves. She watches. She retains everything she observes. She understands the full situation better than anyone else in her family. She waits. For what? The show has never told us. Maggie's endgame is the only completely unsolved mystery in the Simpson household. We have seen what she can do when she decides to act. We have seen her organize, protect, neutralize threats, and withdraw back into the appearance of ordinary infancy. We have seen her confirm or deny a person's guilt with a single look that carries the authority of a verdict. Behind 36 years of performed helplessness, something has been building patience. And when Maggie finally acts with the full extent of what she has accumulated, Springfield will not see it coming, because she made sure of that. She has been making sure of it since she was old enough to understand what Lisa's visibility cost her. Section 8. Mona Simpson and the Family Conspiracy. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. That was the official account, delivered by Homer's father Abe, when Homer was still young enough that the explanation settled into the shape of his understanding of the world before he had the tools to question it. Abe showed Homer a grave. Homer mourned in the incomplete way children mourn things they do not fully understand. He grew up believing he was a boy whose mother had simply ceased to exist while he was still young, leaving a gap he never learned to name correctly. This belief shaped Homer Simpson in ways that are visible in almost every episode if you know what you are looking at. His desperate need for approval from the people around him, his clinginess toward Marge and the terror underneath that clinginess, the specific fear of someone who was abandoned young that if he is not sufficiently lovable, sufficiently present, sufficiently whatever the person needs, they will make the same calculation his mother apparently made. His willingness to endure contempt and humiliation from his employer without resistance, because the alternative, losing the stability of his working life, felt worse than any amount of mistreatment. His inability to sustain anger long enough to act on it, because anger requires the secure foundation that someone abandoned young does not have. Homer's emotional architecture is a coping system built on top of an absence, a mother-shaped wound that he never learned to grieve correctly because he was never given an accurate account of what happened. Season 7 revealed the absence was constructed. The episode is Mother Simpson. It aired the 19th of November, 1995. Homer fakes his own death to avoid a Saturday at work, which is completely and characteristically Homer. When Marge insists he go to the Hall of Records and correct the resulting administrative error, Homer discovers something that changes the entire shape of his understanding of himself. According to the municipal records, his mother is alive. She has always been alive. The grave Abe showed him as a child was not hers. It belonged to Walt Whitman, the poet. Abe had been pointing at a literary monument and calling it his wife's burial place for the entirety of Homer's life. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery, visiting what she believes is her son's grave. She had heard through indirect channels that Homer was dead, and the administrative confusion had reached her. She does not recognize him at first. He has become someone different from the boy she knew, changed by decades of a life she was not present for. When he proves who he is, the reunion is one of the most affecting scenes the show ever produced. A grown man and his mother, separated for 27 years, finding each other beside a headstone that belongs to neither of them. And then Mona tells him the truth. It begins in 1969. Mona was a housewife, married to Abe, mother to young Homer, living an ordinary life in Springfield while the world outside was moving through extraordinary changes, and something in the motion of that world reached her and altered something fundamental in her understanding of what ordinary life was accepting on behalf of others without examination. She joined a group of activists who had identified a target they believed was causing genuine and specific harm. The target was a biological weapons laboratory owned by Mr. Burns. Not just a nuclear power plant, a facility producing biological weapons operating in Springfield, in the same town where Homer was growing up, where families were living their daily lives with no knowledge that the richest man in the community was manufacturing weaponized pathogens down the road. Mona and her group infiltrated the lab and detonated an antibiotic bomb, destroying the biological agent stored inside. During the raid, they accidentally cured the asthma of the facility's security guard, a younger version of Clancy Wiggum, who would eventually become Springfield's chief of police. The raid succeeded. The biological agents were destroyed. But Mona made a single mistake. As the group fled, she stopped to help someone who had fallen during the chaos. That person was Mr. Burns. She paused to assist the man whose weapons she had just destroyed. Burns saw her face clearly. He identified her. He contacted the FBI. From that moment, Mona Simpson was a federal fugitive. She could not go home. She could not contact Abe or Homer. She kissed her son goodbye while he was sleeping and left his life in the middle of the night. Homer woke up and his mother was gone. He was told she had died. For 27 years he believed he was the kind of son whose mother found reasons to leave. Burns did not merely identify Mona to the FBI. He pursued her, actively, for decades, maintaining a personal vendetta against someone who had cost him something he valued. When Mona returned to Springfield in the Season 7 episode, Burns recognized her almost immediately from a car window after more than 25 years had passed. He contacted the authorities. The FBI arrived within hours. Mona had to leave again. Homer said goodbye to his mother for the second time. And this time he knew why she was going. He knew who was making her go. He knew the person responsible was the man whose name appeared on his paycheck. Homer did not connect these facts into action. He did not confront Burns. He did not quit his position. He continued to arrive at Sector 7G because Homer is not capable of holding multiple complex facts in sustained relation to each other and following their implications to a logical conclusion. The crayon, the radiation, the decades of cognitive erosion from living inside a contamination zone. Homer is too damaged, in too many compounding ways, to understand the architecture of his own circumstances. Burns did not merely ruin Mona's life. He shaped Homer's. By forcing Mona out when Homer was a child, Burns produced an adult Homer who was emotionally damaged in precisely the ways that make him the ideal employee for a man who needs compliant, non-confrontational labor in a safety-critical role. A person who was abandoned young will not risk losing the stability of employment. A person desperate for approval will not challenge the authority that provides it. A person who never learned he deserved better will not demand better. Homer works at the nuclear power plant not because he cannot find alternatives. Homer works there because Burns broke him as a child, and the broken version of Homer is exactly what the plant requires to maintain its current operations. The show confirmed the depth of this arrangement in a later episode, revealing that Burns had committed a crime that Abe had discovered, and in exchange for Abe's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer's employment regardless of performance. 742 documented errors at the facility, Homer was never permanently dismissed. Because a deal had been made between his father and the man who had destroyed his family, without Homer's knowledge and without any intention of ever telling him. 3 generations. Abe, who buried the truth and told himself it was protection. Mona, who fought against something genuinely worth fighting and lost everything she had. Homer, who inherited all of the damage without ever receiving the information that might have helped him understand where it came from. Mona died in a later season. The episode depicting her death does not use comedy to cushion the impact. Homer sits with her, he holds her hand. He watches the mother he barely got to know leave for the last time. No reset follows. No joke softens it. Just a man and his mother, and 27 years of stolen time pressing down on both of them in the minutes they have left. The Simpsons is a comedy. It has always been genuinely funny. But underneath the jokes, underneath every couch gag and every donut and every strangling, there is a story about a family systematically dismantled by one man's power and one community's inability to resist it. Mona fought and lost everything. Abe made peace with the enemy. Homer inherited the consequences and spent his entire adult life unable to understand why his life felt heavier than it should. Burns won. Burns has always won. Because in Springfield, the person with the money writes the rules. And the rules say Homer Simpson reports to Sector 7G until he dies. Because his grandfather made a deal. Because his mother made a choice. Because the richest man in town needed a broken man in a specific role. Homer was broken before he ever clocked in on his first day. Section 9. The predictions what The Simpsons actually got right. In the year 2000, an episode called Bart to the Future showed a glimpse of a possible future in which Lisa Simpson has become the first female president of the United States. Mentioned in passing, almost as a throwaway detail, her predecessor in the Oval Office was Donald Trump. The episode aired 16 years before November 2016. When that clip resurfaced in the days following the election, the internet's response was close to collective vertigo. Screenshots spread across every platform simultaneously. People who had not thought about The Simpsons in years found themselves asking the question the phenomenon generates again and again: how did they know? The list of apparent predictions extends well beyond Trump. In 1995, the show depicted a wrist-mounted communication device that functions recognizably as a smartwatch. In 1998, Homer encountered a mathematical equation that mathematicians later noted bears a structural resemblance to formulations used in predicting the mass of the Higgs boson particle, which was not confirmed experimentally until 2012. In 1999, Homer proposed that the universe might be shaped like a donut. Subsequent cosmological work analyzing cosmic radiation patterns found configurations consistent with a toroidal universe. In 1993, an episode called Margin Chains depicted a flu virus originating in Asia spreading through Springfield, causing panic, supply disruptions, and a desperate search for treatment 27 years before COVID-19. And during the fictional outbreak, the accidental release of aggressive insects echoed the appearance of Asian giant hornets in the United States during the actual 2020 pandemic. In 1996, a joke featured Cypress Hill accidentally booking the London Symphony Orchestra while in an altered state. In 2024, Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall, 28 years after the joke. In 1998, the show depicted Disney acquiring 20th Century Fox. The actual acquisition occurred in 2019. Every time a new apparent prediction goes viral, the question is the same. How did they know? Are the writers somehow connected to future events? Is the show a prophetic text embedded inside a cartoon wrapper? The answer from the people who actually make the show is considerably more prosaic. Al Jean, long-serving executive producer. If you throw enough darts, you get some bullseyes. Nearly 800 episodes across 36 years, each containing dozens of satirical observations about American culture, technology, society, and politics. Statistical probability alone guarantees some alignment with future events. That is simply what happens when you produce an enormous volume of material over an extremely long time. Producer Bill Oakley was more direct. There are very few cases where the show actually predicted anything. Mostly it is coincidence, because the episodes are old enough that history repeats itself. Fact-checking organizations examining the most viral claims found consistent patterns. Most of the apparent predictions were extrapolations from trends that were already visible and accelerating at the time the episodes were written. The writers did not predict Trump's presidency. They observed that Trump had been publicly discussing a potential run for office since the late 1980s and wrote a joke about the logical extension of celebrity culture entering politics. They did not predict the Disney-Fox merger. They observed that media consolidation was an accelerating structural trend in the entertainment industry and extended it to an absurd conclusion. They did not invent the smartwatch. They observed that computing technology was getting consistently smaller and more personal, and imagined what the next iteration of that progression might look like on a wrist. The Simpsons writing staff has historically contained an unusual concentration of people with serious academic credentials. Harvard, Yale, and similar institutions represented in the writers' room, with educational backgrounds in mathematics, physics, computer science, economics, and political theory. These are not people making random guesses. They are highly educated, careful observers of American culture who spend their professional lives identifying patterns in what is happening and thinking through where those patterns lead if they continue. They are not predicting the future. They are reading the present more carefully than most people do and then extending it forward a few steps. But some coincidences are specific enough that the statistical explanation begins to feel strained. The Trump prediction did not merely suggest that celebrity might enter mainstream politics. It named Trump specifically. It depicted him descending an escalator in a sequence that visually mirrors his actual 2015 campaign announcement almost exactly. The Siegfried and Roy material did not make a vague observation about the general risks of exotic animal performance. It depicted a white tiger attacking a performer in a way that closely resembles what happened in 2003 when Roy Horn was critically injured by one of the act's white tigers. These are not vague trend extrapolations. These are specific details aligning with specific future events in ways that feel different from coincidence, even when you know the mechanism is coincidence. This is where the most interesting theory about the predictions emerges. It is not about the show predicting the future. It is about the show shaping it. The Simpsons is one of the most deeply embedded pieces of American media in history. It has been running for longer than most of its current audience has been alive. Its observations have become part of how Americans understand and narrate their own cultural moment. When the show makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream of tens of millions of people. It becomes a reference point. It makes the possibility feel familiar rather than shocking. It primes the cultural imagination toward a particular outcome by making that outcome feel like something that has already been processed rather than something unprecedented. When the event eventually arrives, it does not feel like a surprise. It feels like recognition. We have been here before. The show already visited this. The joke got there first. And when reality caught up, what we experienced was not shock, but the particular quality of something confirming what we had been prepared to expect. The show did not predict that Disney would buy Fox. The show made media consolidation feel like an obvious and inevitable outcome by depicting it as something already accomplished. When Disney actually acquired Fox, the dominant cultural reaction was not astonishment. It was, of course. We already knew this was coming, The Simpsons told us. Springfield does not reflect America as it is. America has been becoming Springfield, partly because the show spent 36 years holding a mirror up to American culture, and partly because the audience stared into that mirror long enough that the reflection and the reality started to resemble each other. The show's satire did not forecast the future. It normalized the future. It made specific outcomes feel familiar before they arrived, so that when they arrived, they felt less like disruptions than like confirmations. There is one more element to the prediction phenomenon that almost never gets discussed. The Simpsons has also made thousands of predictions that did not come true. Jokes about jetpacks and moon colonies and technological developments that never materialized. Political outcomes that went the other direction. Cultural shifts the show anticipated that did not happen. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody builds Reddit threads about the times The Simpsons was wrong. The misses evaporate into the enormous volume of material that the show has produced. The hits are preserved, shared, amplified, and treated as evidence. Confirmation bias works in only one direction. We remember what landed and forget what didn't. When you produce 800 episodes of satirical cultural observation and then filter those observations through the most powerful confirmation bias amplification engine ever created, which is the internet, you produce a highlight reel that looks like prophecy. The failed predictions have already been forgotten. The successful ones are all that remain in the public consciousness, and that selection makes the show look like it knows things it has no mechanism for knowing. It does not know those things. It wrote enough possible futures that some of them were statistically bound to arrive. And the ones that arrived are the only ones anybody still talks about. Even understanding the mechanism completely does not eliminate the feeling. When a clip from 1997 aligns with a headline from this week, there is still something that makes you pause. That feeling is real even when the explanation is mundane. 800 episodes, 36 years. Thousands of attentive observations about where America appeared to be heading, and enough bullseyes in the end to make even the show's own creators occasionally stop and wonder. Section 10. Where is Springfield? The Geography Mystery. Springfield is the most famous fictional American city in the world. More people could name Springfield without prompting than could name the capital of most actual states. It has a nuclear plant, a harbor, a tire fire, a gorge, mountains, ocean access, desert, farmland, an elementary school, a prison, 2 hospitals, and a monorail that everyone agreed to build after a single musical number. And after 36 years of broadcast, nobody can say with certainty where it is. Every clue that appears to narrow the location is contradicted by another clue in a different episode. Springfield has been placed adjacent to Ohio, Nevada, Maine, and Kentucky, depending on which episode you consult, and those states are not geographically adjacent to each other in any real arrangement. The town has ocean access and mountain ranges and desert terrain all within apparent driving distance. Lisa's area code corresponds to Missouri. The state abbreviation visible in certain episodes is NT, which is not an abbreviation for any actual state. When Homer calls the state capital in one episode, the voice on the other end identifies the state as beginning with a vowel, which eliminates some possibilities while leaving dozens of others viable. Matt Groening addressed the question directly in a 2012 interview with Smithsonian Magazine, revealing he had named the town after Springfield, Oregon, where he grew up nearby. For approximately 48 hours, the mystery appeared resolved. Then the show continued exactly as before, placing Springfield in geographic contexts incompatible with Oregon. The writers did not adjust the show to honor the creator's disclosure. The contradictions continued. The ambiguity was maintained. Because the ambiguity is not an accident, it is one of the show's most carefully maintained formal choices. No actual American city has ocean access and mountain ranges, and desert and active volcanic features all within casual driving range of each other. Springfield is assembled from pieces of every American community that has ever existed. It carries the industrial decay of the Rust Belt, the suburban sprawl of the Sun Belt, the small-town insularity of New England, and the agricultural flatness of the Midwest. It is everywhere and nowhere. It is the town that every viewer can claim as something resembling where they actually live, regardless of where that actually is. That is the intentional design philosophy. Groening confirmed it. The writers confirmed it. Springfield is meant to be a place any American viewer can recognize something of their own community in, because it is constructed from everything American communities have ever been. But under the frameworks we have been examining tonight, the geographic impossibility takes on additional meaning. If the radiation theory is accurate, and the contamination has fundamentally altered biological reality inside Springfield's limits, why should the physical landscape be exempt from alteration? If the people inside the contamination zone operate by different biological rules than people outside it, perhaps the geography inside the zone operates by different physical rules as well. Perhaps radiation at sufficient intensity does not merely affect organisms. Perhaps it warps space in ways that compress features which should be hundreds of miles apart into a single impossible locality. If the coma theory is accurate, Springfield's geographic incoherence is immediately and elegantly explained. Homer's dreaming mind does not contain a precise cartographic model of the United States. It contains impressions, emotional residue, fragments of places experienced over a lifetime, mountains from a vacation he remembers fondly, ocean from a film he watched at some point, desert from driving through somewhere once, farmland from a long road trip. His unconscious assembled Springfield from every American landscape he had ever encountered without concern for geographic logic. Because dreams do not operate by geographic logic, they operate by emotional logic. Springfield feels like America because it is constructed from Homer's emotional memory of America, which is scattered and incomplete and held together by longing rather than cartography. If the collective denial principle governs Springfield's reality, the geographic impossibility functions as a legal defense. You cannot investigate a facility you cannot find on a reliable map. You cannot bring sustained regulatory action against a nuclear plant if the jurisdictional state changes depending on which episode you consult. You cannot hold anyone permanently accountable for anything if the framework for accountability is perpetually undefined. Springfield floats between states because a floating target has no fixed regulatory authority. No single state EPA office has consistent jurisdiction over its environmental violations. No single state attorney general has ongoing responsibility for what happens inside its limits. No federal investigation can establish venue without a stable address. The town's geographic ambiguity protects it from the sustained oversight that its actual conditions would otherwise require. In the Season 12 episode Behind the Laughter, a mockumentary about the Simpson family's rise and fall as a television phenomenon, Springfield's location is finally revealed. In the original broadcast, the family was identified as being from northern Kentucky. In syndicated reruns, the location was changed to a different state. The definitive answer to the greatest geographic mystery in television history literally depends on which version of the episode you happen to be watching. The answer is not stable. It changes depending on the platform. Even when Springfield has an official location, that location is not fixed. Springfield will never be placed on a map that everyone agrees on. The show made this decision early and has maintained it across 3.5 decades. A Springfield that could be anywhere belongs to everyone who has ever lived in a community with a plant on the outskirts, a corrupt local power structure, an economic dependence on the wrong things, and a collective practice of not looking too closely at any of it. That description, as it happens, fits considerably more places than the writers probably intended when they invented the town. Section 11. The Floating Timeline, Hans Moleman and the Darkness Behind Ned Flanders. Bart Simpson was 10 years old on the 17th of December, 1989. He is 10 years old now. Lisa was 8 then and remains 8. Maggie was 1 and remains 1. Homer and Marge were in their mid-30s and remain in their mid-30s. 36 real years have passed. 0 Springfield years have passed. The floating timeline. The characters exist in a permanent present tense. The year of each episode's broadcast is the year the characters inhabit. Technology updates around them. Cultural references shift. The world evolves. The characters remain frozen at the same ages they were when the show began. This is standard practice for long-running animated series, and most viewers accept it without much examination. But The Simpsons has been running long enough that the floating timeline has produced contradictions substantial enough to make the mechanism visible in a way it usually is not. And visible mechanisms invite the kinds of questions Springfield typically discourages. The structural problem is Homer and Marge's personal history. When the show began, their courtship was anchored in the late 1970s and early 1980s. The music, the fashion, the cultural references all place their formative years in a specific, recognizable era. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they did not meet in 1980. They met around 2005. Their high school years were not defined by Watergate and disco. They were defined by social media and smartphones. The show has acknowledged this by simply retelling the Homer and Marge origin story. At least 4 times now, each version placing their youth in a different decade. They were depicted as 70s teenagers, then as 80s grunge fans, then as 90s nostalgia figures, then as something resembling millennials. The love story is the same. The characters are the same. But the era slides forward every few years because the timeline demands it. Their past is not a fixed document. It is a draft that gets revised whenever the current version creates an impossible arithmetic problem. They have whatever history is needed to make the present episode work, and when a future episode needs a different history, the old one is quietly discarded. Now apply all 4 frameworks we have been building. The coma theory. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who went unconscious in April 1993. His mind froze the people he loves at the moment he lost access to them. The radiation theory. Nobody ages because the cellular mechanisms of normal aging have been disrupted by decades of chronic low-level radioactive exposure in a contaminated population. The collective denial theory, nobody ages because Springfield has agreed, implicitly and repeatedly and collectively, not to acknowledge the passage of time. Because time implies change and change implies consequences, the community cannot afford to face. The Burns immortality theory. At least one Springfield resident has already broken the normal parameters of human lifespan through wealth and technology, establishing within this universe that aging is negotiable for those with sufficient resources. All four arrive at the same observation. Time does not work in Springfield. The floating timeline is not a production convenience. It is a symptom. It is the show telling you that these characters are trapped in a loop, cycling through variations of the same lives without ever moving toward the conclusion that time eventually delivers to every living thing. Now let us spend a quiet moment with two supporting characters who illuminate different aspects of this entrapment. Hans Moleman is a small, elderly, nearly blind man who appears throughout Springfield primarily to suffer. He is struck by cars, crushed by objects, struck by lightning, buried, incinerated, and falls into traffic with a regularity that has accumulated into something remarkable over the show's run. He has been killed more times than any other character in the history of American animation. In regular canonical episodes, not in the holiday horror specials that operate outside the main continuity. And then he appears in the next episode, completely unchanged. No explanation, no resurrection. No acknowledgement from any character that this person was dead recently. He returns, ready for the next thing, in a cycle the show treats as background texture. Under the radiation theory, Moleman represents the most extreme biological alteration in Springfield. His cellular machinery has been so thoroughly disrupted by decades of exposure that his body reconstitutes after fatal trauma. He does not merely survive damage, he actually dies and then returns. Death in Springfield, for certain residents, may be a temporary condition. The show offers one detail about Moleman that was stated once and never returned to. He identified his own age as 31. 31. He appears to be in his late 80s or older. His posture is severely compromised. His vision is essentially non-functional. He moves through the world as someone who has already substantially outlived the physical capacity of his form. If his stated age is accurate, something catastrophically accelerated his physical deterioration decades ahead of any normal schedule. Something that simultaneously made him nearly indestructible despite his apparent frailty. The radiation theory has a coherent account of how both of these things could be true at the same time. Now consider Ned Flanders. Because Ned is the character the show has most thoroughly dismantled without the audience quite registering the extent of the dismantling. On the surface, Ned is everything Homer is not. Kind, generous, devoutly religious, physically fit, financially responsible, a good father and a good neighbor. He is, by most objective measures, a significantly better person than Homer in nearly every dimension. He gives more. He takes less. He apologizes when Homer does not. He maintains relationships Homer lets atrophy through inattention. And the show punishes him for it with a consistency that begins to feel, after sustained attention, less like dark comedy and more like diagnosis. Ned's wife Maude was killed at the Springfield Speedway when a t-shirt cannon misfired because Homer was dodging the projectiles rather than catching them. The shirts struck Maude. She fell from the bleachers. She died. Homer's selfishness in a directly causal chain killed Ned's wife. Ned forgave him, because that is what Ned does. He absorbs punishment and responds with grace and patience and the stated faith that God has a plan for the suffering he experiences. This continued until a hurricane destroyed Ned's house, and the community rebuilt it so incompetently that it collapsed immediately after completion. And Ned broke. He had a complete psychological collapse. He said things to the people around him that he had been holding for a long time. Honest things, true things. The accounting of what had been done to him and what he had been required to absorb and respond to with cheerfulness. And then he was institutionalized, where it was revealed that Ned's relentless niceness is not a natural personality trait. It is the result of childhood behavioral modification. Ned was an aggressive and essentially uncontrollable child. His parents, beatniks who did not believe in conventional discipline, took him to a psychiatrist who spent years systematically conditioning the anger out of his behavioral repertoire. Not through gentle redirection, but through methods, The episode depicts as intensive and thorough. The capacity for sustained rage was processed out of Ned before he was old enough to choose whether he wanted to keep it. His patience with Homer is not saintly self-restraint. His brain was rewired to prevent him from sustaining anger. His forgiveness of Homer after Maude's death is not grace. It is the automatic response of a conditioning that overrides everything else. His faith is a framework a man with no access to his own anger needs to make sense of a world that keeps hurting him despite everything he does to prevent it. The show has shown us what happens when the conditioning fails. When Ned cannot maintain the performance of positivity, the despair underneath is bottomless. Not the cartoon rage that the setup might seem to promise, but something much heavier. The exhaustion of a man who has been doing everything right for decades and receiving the specific return that Springfield offers. Indifference from the world, silence from God, and a neighbor who will never understand what he costs. God talks to Homer multiple times, direct conversation, acknowledged within the show as genuine theological contact. Ned goes to church every week. He has organized his entire existence around his faith. He prays with genuine intention. He has never, in 36 seasons, received a response. The drunk who falls asleep in the pew gets divine conversation. The devout man who has given his life to the relationship gets silence. That is not a random outcome. That is the show making a statement about how the system works. Goodness is not rewarded in Springfield. Compliance is. Homer is compliant because he cannot sustain the cognitive complexity required to resist anything effectively. Ned is compliant because he was engineered for it before he had the ability to choose otherwise. The system accommodates both of them, but only one of them is protected by it. Homer does everything wrong and remains employed, housed, and surrounded by people who love him. Ned does everything right and his wife is dead and his house collapsed and God will not return his calls. They have lived next door to each other for 36 years. The gap between them has not closed by an inch. Because the gap is not an accident, it is a feature. The system is designed to maintain it. To keep Homer at the plant and Ned at the church and Burns at the top and Molman in the ground and everyone exactly where they are, cycling through the same loop, which does not break and was never designed to. Section 12. The Principal and the Pauper when Springfield made truth illegal. There is an episode that the show's most devoted fans will tell you is the worst thing The Simpsons ever made. An episode that has been cited for nearly 30 years as the moment the writers abandoned their commitment to their own world and betrayed the trust of the audience that had been following them. An episode consistently ranked at or near the bottom of any critical ranking of the series. Season 9, Episode 2. The Principal and the Pauper. It aired the 28th of September 1997. The backlash was immediate and severe, and it has never fully faded. People still cite this episode when they want to identify precisely when The Simpsons went wrong. Harry Shearer, who voices Skinner among dozens of other characters, stated his displeasure with the storyline publicly. Critics argued the episode destroyed Skinner's character by making everything previously established about him fictional: his military service, his relationship with his mother, his dynamic with Bart, his entire history, all of it built on a lie. But what if the fans have been reading this wrong? What if the episode did not break The Simpsons? What if it revealed what The Simpsons had always been? Here is what happens. Springfield Elementary holds an event honoring Principal Seymour Skinner's 20 years of service to the school. During the celebration, an unknown man walks in. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real Seymour Skinner, a Vietnam War veteran who was captured as a prisoner of war, presumed dead, and who survived, escaped, and came home to discover that someone had been living his life for 2 decades. The man Springfield has known as Principal Skinner is an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, Tamzarian was a street kid, a petty criminal with no prospects and no future. He was drafted into the army and served in the same unit as the real Skinner. When Skinner was captured and presumed killed, Tamzarian felt responsible. He traveled to Springfield to deliver the news to Skinner's mother, Agnes. When he arrived, Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never been wanted by anyone, who had never had a name worth keeping or a family or a home, went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner. He took the name, the rank, the life, the mother. He lived inside that stolen identity for 20 years, until the real Skinner walked through the door. Now here is where Springfield does something that the fans called a betrayal, and that I want to propose was the most honest thing the show ever did. The town holds a meeting. The real Seymour Skinner is present. Armin Tamzarian is present. The truth is fully exposed. Everyone in Springfield knows their principal is a fraud. That the man who has been running their school, parenting Agnes, participating in their community for 2 decades is not who he claimed to be. The truth is in the room. It is undeniable. And the question before the community is what to do with it. And the town votes not to prosecute Tamzarian, not to restore the real Skinner's identity, not to acknowledge the truth. The town votes on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. The verdict is unanimous. They vote to keep the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree establishing that the imposter is the real Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the war veteran who survived captivity and came home to find his life occupied, is tied to a railroad car and physically removed from Springfield. And the judge makes it explicitly illegal to ever mention what actually happened, under penalty of torture. A town collectively decided that their comfort was more important than the truth. They had definitive proof that a major public figure in their community had been living a stolen identity for 20 years. They had the person whose identity was stolen standing in the room. And they chose the fake. They sentenced the truth to exile. They made it a crime to speak its name. Fans hated this. The episode is consistently ranked among the worst the show ever made. Critics called it a betrayal of continuity and a failure of creative nerve. But here's the thing nobody wanted to acknowledge. The episode is completely honest about what Springfield is. Springfield has always worked this way. The town has always chosen comfortable fictions over uncomfortable facts. The town has always agreed to forget whatever does not fit the preferred narrative. The only difference is that this episode showed you the mechanism. It showed you the vote. It showed you the legal decree. It showed you the literal expulsion of truth from the community when the truth became inconvenient. Every other time Springfield forgets a catastrophe, ignores a contradiction, or resets after something world-altering happens, the forgetting happens off-screen, between episodes. In the gap that the show does not show you, The Principal and the Pauper is the only episode that let you watch the forgetting happen in real time. Consider how many times Springfield has experienced events that should permanently alter the reality of the town. The dome, the environmental catastrophes, the near-nuclear incidents, the literal blocking of the sun. And every single time, by the following episode, everything is back to normal. Nobody references the previous disaster. Nobody carries the weight of what happened. The slate is wiped. Fans call this episodic storytelling. The coma theory calls it a dreaming brain resetting between cycles. The radiation theory calls it cognitive damage compromising sustained memory function. But The Principal and the Pauper offers a fourth explanation. Springfield resets because the town chooses to reset. Collectively, deliberately. Through an unspoken social contract that says they will not acknowledge what happened, they will maintain the agreed-upon version of reality. They will treat the lie as truth and the truth as a threat, and anyone who breaks this contract will be removed from the community. That is not a cartoon convention. That is how communities work when their survival depends on not asking certain questions. Small towns in particular have a capacity for collective denial that is nearly absolute. Scandals get buried. Crimes get incorporated into the background. Uncomfortable truths get rewritten through years of sustained social pressure until the official version is the only version anyone remembers. The Principal and the Pauper did not break The Simpsons. It diagnosed Springfield. It showed you that the town's amnesia is not a glitch in the storytelling. It is a feature of the community, a defense mechanism employed by a population that cannot afford to confront the reality of their situation. Confronting it would mean acknowledging that their principal is a fraud, that their power plant is poisoning them, that their billionaire employer has been alive for over a century, that their children have been yellow since birth and nobody thought to ask why, that the fish have 3 eyes and nobody followed up. Springfield does not forget because its residents lack the intelligence to remember. Springfield forgets because remembering is existentially dangerous, and the mechanisms that make forgetting easier, the radiation, the coma cycles, the social contract, have all been operating in the same direction for 36 years, reinforcing each other until forgetting is the default and memory is the aberration. The real Seymour Skinner was Springfield's canary. He arrived with proof that the official narrative was a fabrication. And the town's response was not gratitude. The town's response was to criminalize the proof and exile the person who brought it. That is the show telling you exactly how Springfield maintains its impossible reality, through consensus, through denial, through the systematic removal of anyone who insists on a version of events the community has decided it cannot afford to accept. And if the coma theory is true, this episode takes on an additional dimension. If everything since season 4 is Homer's dream, then Homer's dreaming mind invented a scenario where an entire community votes to sustain a lie and exile the truth, because Homer needs to believe that lies can be maintained indefinitely through collective agreement. He needs to believe that a stolen life can become real if enough people agree to call it real. He needs to believe that the false version of a life can replace the authentic one and nobody will ever successfully challenge it. Because that is what Homer's coma is. A false life replacing a real one. A dream holding the shape of an existence. And as long as nobody questions it, as long as the Dreamtown keeps voting to maintain the fiction, Homer never has to wake up. Armin Tamzarian is still pretending to be Seymour Skinner. Springfield is still pretending everything is fine. And the real Seymour Skinner is somewhere out there, tied to a train, exiled from his own life. The last honest man in a town that made honesty illegal. Section 13. Everything connects the final theory. We have spent a long time in Springfield tonight. We stood at the fence around the nuclear plant and read the violation count. We looked at Blinky and then looked at the residents and noticed the pattern. We sat beside Homer's hospital bed and argued about whether he ever left it. We reopened the Burns shooting and examined the official verdict until the seams showed. We traced Burns's impossible lifespan through its medical infrastructure and found money and radiation at the center of it. We watched Maggie check that no observer remained before she replayed the moment alone. We followed Mona's trail from the ordinary world to the underground and found Burns at the origin of every wound the family carries. We searched for Springfield on every map that exists and found it on none of them. We watched the floating timeline and felt the weight of it. Every theory we examined uses different evidence and different logic and different assumptions about what the show is fundamentally doing. But every theory arrives at the same central observation. Something is wrong in Springfield, something structural and persistent and deep, something that operates below the level of the jokes, below the animation style, below the episodic format. Whether that something is radiation or a coma dream or collective denial or institutional corruption or the accumulated weight of 36 years of refusing to allow anything to change, something has broken the normal rules of how reality operates in this town. And the show has been pointing at it since its very first season. Not through dramatic reveals, not through explicit statements, through accumulation, through the slow, patient layering of detail upon detail until the pattern becomes impossible to dismiss if you have been paying the right kind of attention. The three-eyed fish, the bones in the basement, the crayon in the brain, the glowing man in the woods, the contest nobody won, the mother who died but did not, the principal who was never himself, the town that voted to make truth illegal, the baby who waited until the room was empty. The show has been showing you all of this, consistently, for decades. Because the writers understood, at some level that may have been more instinctive than deliberate, that a cartoon about a cartoon family could carry the weight of something considerably heavier than it appeared to be carrying. That the jokes could function as the delivery mechanism for a sustained portrait of how power operates in communities that have made themselves dependent on that power. How communities maintain comfortable lies. How individuals get broken by systems they cannot name clearly enough to resist. The radiation theory says, Springfield is a contamination zone. Its population is symptomatic. The contamination explains every impossible thing about the show that has always been left without explanation. The coma theory says, Springfield is a dream. Its dream logic is the logic of a sleeping mind constructing the world it loved before it lost consciousness, cycling through variations of the same love story without end. The collective denial theory says, Springfield chooses to forget because remembering is too dangerous. The resets are not narrative conveniences. They are expressions of a social contract that treats forgetting as mandatory and memory as a threat. The Burns immortality theory says, one person in Springfield has broken the rules of human existence through accumulated wealth, and his survival requires the continuation of the same systems that have been slowly destroying everyone around him. All four read the same evidence. All four arrive at the same place. Time does not work here. Consequences do not stick. Memory is unreliable. The powerful are protected, and the vulnerable are expendable, and the community agrees to this arrangement continuously and collectively. Because the alternative is confronting a reality the community cannot survive acknowledging. If you acknowledge the contamination, you confront the plant. If you confront the plant, you challenge Burns. If you challenge Burns, the economy collapses. If the economy collapses, the town dies. So you agree, without ever saying it explicitly, not to acknowledge the contamination. You develop the habit of not seeing it. You pass the habit to your children. You eventually make the not seeing into something like law. The real Seymour Skinner was tied to a train. Springfield does not forget because its residents lack the capacity to remember. Springfield forgets because the systems that make forgetting easier have been operating in the same direction for 36 years, and remembering has become the harder and more dangerous path. The floating timeline is the show's thesis statement. These characters are frozen because we froze them. Not the writers, not the network, the audience. We have been watching this show across more than 3 decades, and we kept watching when the quality shifted, and we kept watching when the continuity errors accumulated beyond easy explanation, and we kept watching because something about this particular impossible family in this particular impossible town was worth the continued attention. We pressed pause in 1989. We have been holding it down ever since. And maybe that is the honest conclusion of everything we spent tonight examining. Not that the radiation explains the characters, not that Homer has been dreaming, not that the town voted to forget. Maybe the conclusion is simpler than all of those theories combined and more personal than any of them. Maybe we kept watching because the Simpsons are something we recognize. Homer is the father who loves his children past the extent of his own competence, who shows up imperfectly and continuously, who fails at the job and cannot stop trying. Marge is the patience that keeps the whole structure standing when nothing else would. Bart is the energy that refuses to be contained by any institution designed to contain it. Lisa is the intelligence that sees everything clearly and cannot make anyone else see it. Maggie is the part of ourselves we keep quiet and hidden because we learned early that visibility is not always protection. These are not cartoon characters. They are the versions of ourselves we recognize most clearly when we stop trying to look good. Springfield is not a prediction of where America was heading. It is a description of where America already was. The corrupt employer, the incompetent safety apparatus, the community too economically dependent on the wrong things to ask the right questions. The collective practice of normalizing what should alarm us until it becomes the furniture of our daily experience. The show just wrote it down first, and then kept writing it for 36 years while America kept watching. Every mystery we examine tonight, every buried detail, every impossible thing that happens in Springfield and gets forgotten by the following episode, it all comes back to one thing: a family that keeps choosing each other. In a town that keeps choosing to stay, in a loop that nobody has decided to break, because breaking it would mean admitting that 36 years have passed, that we are older now, that the couch we sat on as children watching the opening credits is somewhere else or gone entirely. As long as The Simpsons runs, as long as the timeline floats, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8 and Maggie has not yet said her second word, we do not have to admit any of that. We can turn on the television. We can go home to Evergreen Terrace, to the family that never changes, in the town that never ages, in the loop that started in 1989 and has not stopped since. Homer finds his way home in every episode. Whatever goes wrong, whatever impossible thing the plot requires, whatever distance gets put between him and the people he loves, he ends up back on the couch, with his family. The beer is cold, the television is on, the children are exactly as he last saw them. We keep watching because we want to believe that is possible, that no matter how far things go from what they should be, the path home exists, that the family will still be on the couch when you get there, that nobody had to say goodbye while you were gone. The loop is not a prison. It is a promise we made to ourselves in 1989, and we have kept it. And after 36 years in Springfield, after all the mysteries and all the theories and all the hours spent in the yellow light of that impossible town, the biggest mystery is still the simplest one. Why can we not let them go? Maybe because we are not ready to. Maybe because the show ending means the couch going dark, means admitting that the children grew up somewhere we were not watching, means facing everything that happened in the years between the first episode and wherever you are right now. So the loop keeps going. Homer stumbles through the door. Bart slides down the banister. Lisa plays her saxophone to an empty room. Maggie watches everything and says nothing. And Springfield waits, as it always has, for someone to finally ask the question that the three-eyed fish has been posing since season 2. If something is doing this to the fish, what is it doing to the rest of us? Nobody in Springfield will ever ask it, because Springfield already made sure they cannot. But you can ask it, because you are on the outside of the dome, and that is the difference. Sleep well. Let the images of Springfield settle behind your eyes. The yellow houses, the cooling towers, the tire fire burning at the edge of town in its patient, endless way. The Simpsons on their couch, the 5 of them, frozen in a moment that feels like forever because we decided it would. Homer is already home. He always gets home. The loop goes around again. The couch gag plays. The family sits down together. And somewhere in a hospital room that the show will never show you, something flickers behind a man's closed eyes. He is dreaming of his family. He has been dreaming of them since 1993. And in the dream, they are all still there. Exactly as he left them. Exactly as he needs them to be. Springfield will still be there when you wake up. It always is. That is the whole point. Section 14. The supporting cast as mirrors what Springfield's background people reveal. Every great fictional world is measured not just by its central figures, but by the density and specificity of the people who live in the margins of the frame. The characters who do not have their names in the title. The ones who appear in 3 episodes a season, or 20, or who populate the background of scenes that are about someone else entirely. In a lesser show, these would be props. In The Simpsons, they became people. And what those people collectively reveal about Springfield, about the theories we have been examining, about the show's understanding of how power and community actually work, is worth spending time with before we close. Start with Mo Sislak. Mo runs the only bar in Springfield that matters. Mo's Tavern is not a glamorous establishment. It is dimly lit, perpetually understaffed, and appears to be in mild ongoing violation of several health codes. The clientele consists primarily of men with nowhere else to be, men who have made a kind of peace with the specific quality of life that Moe's represents. Homer goes there, Lenny and Carl go there. Barney Gumble spent what appears to be the majority of his adult years seated on a stool at the end of the bar. A man who had been a promising student before, something in him gave way and let the alcohol in. Moe himself is a person the show has treated with more depth than the character's initial function as bartender would suggest. He has a genuine tenderness toward Homer that goes beyond professional relationship. He has experienced enough loneliness that when genuine human warmth comes near him, he does not know how to accept it gracefully and usually makes things worse in the attempt. He has tried across various episodes to leave Springfield, to improve himself, to find something worth reaching toward. Every attempt ends with him back behind the bar. Under the radiation theory, Moe is a person whose cognitive and emotional development has been compromised by the same contamination affecting everyone else. His inability to escape his circumstances is not entirely a failure of will. It is the natural outcome of a person trying to navigate forward motion with a brain that has been quietly damaged for decades. Under the coma theory, Moe is one of the figures from Homer's waking life preserved in amber. Homer knew Moe before the vending machine fell. Moe is in the dream because Homer's mind kept him there, out of the specific loyalty that comes from spending years at a bar with a person who learned your drink order without being asked. The bar itself functions as one of Springfield's essential nodes. The places where communities actually process information, where the official narrative gets filtered through personal experience, where the gap between what people are supposed to think and what they actually feel gets bridged or doesn't. The tavern has always been more honest than the town hall. The conversations at Moe's are closer to the truth than anything said at a public meeting, and Moe presides over those conversations with a kind of exhausted neutrality that is its own form of wisdom. Then there is Apu Nahasapi Mapedalon, the owner and operator of the Quick E-Mart. Apu is the character who generated the most significant cultural reckoning in the show's history. A 2017 documentary, The Problem with Apu, argued with care and specificity that the show's depiction of Apu had functioned for decades as a vehicle for stereotyping South Asian immigrants in ways that had real effects on the experiences of South Asian Americans who grew up watching the show. The documentary generated a response from the show's producers and writers that most critics found inadequate, and Apu's role in the series was subsequently reduced significantly. This is worth examining, honestly, because it illuminates something about what the show was doing in its golden age that goes beyond the Apu question specifically. The Simpsons was, for much of its run, a show written almost entirely by white male writers from elite educational backgrounds. The satirical intelligence those writers brought to the show was genuine and the empathy was real, but empathy exercised from a position of distance has limits that proximity would not have. The show could see Springfield's working class with affection and specificity, but the affection was the affection of observers. The immigrant experience, the experience of marginalization and hyphenated identity, was rendered with the tools available to people who had not lived it, and those tools were not always sufficient. Apu was, at different moments in the show's run, a genuine character and a collection of stereotypes wearing a character's clothing. The genuine character is visible in episodes that actually spend time inside his perspective. The episode about his arranged marriage and the discovery of love within that arrangement, the episode about his education and ambitions, and the path that led him to the Quickie Mart, the quiet dignity he maintains in a job that does not match the scale of his intelligence and education. The stereotype is visible in the accent, maintained by a white voice actor, that a generation of South Asian Americans reported having directed at them as mockery, in the accumulated shorthand that reduced an actual human being to a set of cultural markers deployed as punchlines. The show's handling of Apu, and its troubled response to criticism of that handling, reveals something that connects to the theories we have been examining. Springfield's collective denial is not merely directed outward, toward the contamination and the corruption. It is also directed inward, toward what the community is willing to examine about itself. Springfield forgetting the dome is the same mechanism as a writer's room, not examining what it was doing with a character, because the character made people laugh, and the laughter felt like success. The mechanism of comfortable omission, the choice not to look closely at something because looking closely would require change. Now consider Chief Wiggum, Ralph's father, the head of Springfield's police department, a man whose incompetence is so total and so consistent that it begins, over the course of dozens of episodes, to feel less like a personal failing and more like a structural feature of the institution he represents. Wiggum is not stupid in the way that Homer is stupid. Homer's cognitive limitations are specific and measurable and have a plausible environmental cause within the show's framework. Wiggum's incompetence is more interesting because it is institutional. He fails in ways that protect the existing power structure. He investigates crimes in ways that systematically produce the outcomes that are most convenient for the people with the most influence in Springfield. The Burns shooting investigation produced a verdict that could not be prosecuted. That is not an accident. That is what the Springfield Police Department does. It closes cases in ways that serve the community's consensus reality rather than the actual truth. Wiggum is not corrupt in any obvious or dramatic sense. He does not take envelopes of cash from Burns. He does not threaten witnesses. He does not seem to be consciously working in anyone's specific interest. He is simply a person who has been shaped by the same forces that shaped everyone else in Springfield, who produces outcomes that happen to serve the same interests that the contamination and the collective denial and the economic dependency all serve, without anyone having sat down and planned it that way. That is the most insidious form of institutional dysfunction. Not the corruption that can be named and prosecuted, but the incompetence that is structurally indistinguishable from corruption in its outcomes. Then there are Lenny Leonard and Carl Carlson, Homer's co-workers and friends, two people who have worked at the nuclear plant for as long as Homer has, in the same compromised environment, breathing the same air and drinking the same water. Lenny and Carl function in the show as Homer's mirror in some ways and his contrast in others. They are slightly more capable, slightly more socially functional, slightly more aware of the dimensions of the world they inhabit, but only slightly. And the smallness of that difference, the fact that working at the plant for decades produces Lenny and Carl rather than Homer, only because of random variation in how the contamination has expressed itself in specific individuals, is one of the quieter arguments the radiation theory makes. Lenny and Carl are what Homer might have been with different luck. Homer is what either of them might have been with slightly different exposure patterns. They are three people shaped by the same forces into slightly different versions of the same basic outcome. Working-class men in a working-class town who have accepted the specific parameters of their lives because the parameters feel as natural as the air they breathe, because the air they breathe has made it difficult to imagine other parameters. And then, counterpoised against all of them, there is Sideshow Bob, Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. is the single character in The Simpsons who most fully escapes the show's general pattern of Springfield residents being shaped by their environment. Sideshow Bob has a genuine classical education, genuine aesthetic sensibility, genuine intellectual ambition. He speaks with a precision that nothing else in Springfield quite matches. He references opera and literature and history with the fluency of someone who actually spent time with those things rather than someone performing familiarity with them. And he has devoted the majority of his adult life to trying to kill a 10-year-old child. This is the show making a particular kind of joke about the relationship between high culture and moral seriousness. The possession of one guarantees nothing about the other. Sideshow Bob is the most cultivated person in Springfield, and he is also a recidivist criminal who has tried to murder Bart Simpson across multiple decades by methods that become progressively more elaborate and no more successful. But there is something else in Sideshow Bob's repeated failures that connects to the theories we have been examining. He keeps coming back to Springfield. He keeps pursuing the same goal through the same person. He cannot escape the loop any more than anyone else can. His intelligence, his education, his aesthetic sophistication, none of it is sufficient to break him free of the particular gravity that Springfield exerts on everyone who falls into its orbit. He is trapped in the same cycle as Homer, as Ned, as Moe, just running a more elaborate pattern within it. Even the most capable person the show depicts cannot escape what Springfield is. That is the theory in its most compressed form. Capability cannot overcome the structural reality. Goodness cannot overcome it. Culture cannot overcome it. The only thing that might overcome it is seeing it clearly, naming it accurately, and then deciding to do something about it. And the show has never given any character the sustained combination of clarity, accurate naming, and capacity for action that such a change would require. Because if it had, the story would have to end. Springfield would have to face the thing the three-eyed fish has been pointing at since season 2, and the show would become something it has never been willing to become. Something with consequences that stick. Section 15. The Simpsons movie and what the dome actually meant. The Simpsons movie arrived in 2007, 18 years into the show's run, after nearly 2 decades of episodes and speculation about whether a theatrical release was ever coming. The anticipation was significant. The box office response confirmed it. The film grossed more than $500 million worldwide, demonstrating that the show's cultural hold was still strong enough to fill theaters even as broadcast viewership had declined substantially from the peaks of the Golden Age. The film's central premise is worth examining slowly, because it is the most explicit statement the show has ever made about what Springfield actually is. Homer, through a cascade of characteristically impulsive decisions, dumps a silo full of pig waste into Lake Springfield, which was already in an environmental crisis serious enough to prompt a community cleanup effort earlier in the film. The contamination tips the lake's toxicity past whatever threshold the EPA uses to classify environmental emergencies. A federal official named Russ Cargill, voiced with particular relish by Albert Brooks, determines that the only appropriate response is physical containment of the entire town. A massive glass dome is lowered over Springfield. Every resident of the town is now sealed inside with the pollution they have been generating and tolerating and pretending not to notice for decades. The dome is not a punishment from an external party for something Springfield did wrong. The dome is the logical endpoint of everything Springfield has been doing to itself. The pollution was always there. The dome just makes it impossible to ignore by making escape impossible. The federal government of the show's universe looked at Springfield and determined that the town was so thoroughly contaminated that physical quarantine was the only viable response. The town is a hazard, not just to the people living in it, who have already been living with the hazard for decades, but to the surrounding region if the contamination is allowed to spread further. And every Springfield resident who has been drinking the water and breathing the air and sending their children to school under the shadow of those cooling towers is inside the dome when it descends. They are sealed in with the accumulated consequence of decades of the thing they agreed not to look at directly. The image is remarkable, not because it is subtle, it is not subtle at all, but because it is the show's most comprehensive acknowledgement of what it has been doing for 18 years, depicting a community that cannot stop the thing destroying it because the thing destroying it is economically necessary, and then living inside the consequences of that inability. Homer caused the dome. Homer is the safety inspector who was never going to prevent the contamination from reaching this point, Because Homer is the specific kind of safety inspector the plant requires. Someone whose job is to fail at the job. But Homer also saves the town at the end of the film, climbing the inside of the dome with his family and escaping, then motorcycle jumping across the dome's surface to drop a bomb into the sinkhole that shatters the glass and allows Springfield to breathe again. The pattern repeats. Homer creates the catastrophe. Homer resolves the catastrophe. The town returns to normal. Nobody meaningfully changes. The plant continues. The water continues to receive what it receives. And the dome, like every other catastrophe Springfield has experienced and forgotten, becomes something that happened once and left no lasting mark on the community's relationship with its own reality. There is one moment in the film that has been discussed less than it deserves. When the dome goes up, the EPA and the government's stated intention is to eventually destroy Springfield entirely, sealing the problem permanently rather than eventually allowing the community to reintegrate with the surrounding area. Russ Cargill frames this as a practical solution to an environmental problem, but within the logic of what the film is depicting, it is the logical conclusion of treating a community primarily as an environmental liability. Springfield is not destroyed in the film because Homer rides a motorcycle, because the personal and the human intervene in the administrative, because one specific person makes a specific choice at a specific moment that changes the outcome. That is a version of optimism the show has always maintained alongside everything else it depicts. The system is corrupt and the contamination is real, and the denial is structural, and the loop does not break. But specific people, at specific moments, can act, can ride a motorcycle across the inside of a dome, can choose, one more time, to go back for the people they love rather than letting the distance stand. Homer always finds his way home, even in the movie, especially in the movie. The dome was the system's final statement about Springfield. Homer's motorcycle was Springfield's answer, and then everything reset, and the show continued, and the dome became something that had happened and did not need to be discussed anymore. Because that is what Springfield does with the truth. Section 16. Lisa's loneliness and what brilliance costs in Springfield. Lisa Simpson has an IQ that the show places, in different episodes, somewhere between 156 and 159. She plays saxophone with genuine musical ability that the show takes seriously as artistic expression rather than treating as a quirk. She has read more widely and thought more carefully about more subjects than anyone else in her household and most of the adults in her community. She is, by essentially every measure the show applies, the most intellectually gifted member of the Simpson family. She is also consistently one of the loneliest characters in the show's universe. This is not incidental. It is not a secondary character detail that exists to create plot opportunities or provide contrast with her siblings. Lisa's loneliness is the central fact of her existence in Springfield, and it is a direct consequence of exactly the qualities that make her remarkable. Her intelligence in this environment is not a resource. It is a condition, something she cannot turn off, cannot moderate to fit the expectations of the people around her, cannot deploy selectively. She sees everything clearly and cannot make anyone else see it. She understands the architecture of her circumstances with a precision that nobody near her can match. And that precision, rather than giving her access to change, mainly gives her a clearer view of the walls. Consider what Springfield does to Lisa across the show's run. She forms a deep attachment to a substitute teacher named Mr. Bergstrom in what remains one of the Golden Age's most affecting episodes. Bergstrom is someone who actually sees her, who treats her intelligence as real rather than inconvenient, who confirms for her that the version of herself she knows is accurate, that she is not misreading the scale of the gap between herself and her environment. When Bergstrom leaves at the episode's end, because substitutes leave, because teachers who actually see Lisa always seem to leave Springfield eventually, he gives her a note that says, "You are Lisa Simpson." It is the most direct affirmation the show has ever offered a character, and its necessity is heartbreaking. That she needs it. That she carries it. She forms friendships with difficulty. The few people in Springfield who can operate close to her level tend to be adults who occupy positions that place the friendship outside normal social categories, or temporary presences who move on. Her peer relationships within her age group are strained by the gap between what she thinks about and what her classmates think about. Not because she is contemptuous of her classmates, she is not contemptuous. She is simply unable to pretend the gap is smaller than it is, and pretending would be the social requirement for the friendships the gap prevents. She is a vegetarian in a town that runs on meat. She is an environmentalist in a town that is actively an environmental disaster. She is an idealist in a community that has structured its entire functioning around the pragmatic acceptance of things that should not be accepted. Every value she holds is in direct conflict with some structural feature of the place where she lives. And she cannot leave. She is 8. She has nowhere else to go. The show has shown us what Lisa might become if she grew up and left Springfield. In Lisa's Wedding, the season 6 flash-forward episode, we see a 23-year-old Lisa who is engaged, educated, working in London, building the life the show has always suggested she is capable of building. She has become, in that imagined future, the person the 8-year-old version of her has always been reaching toward. The gap between her and her environment has been solved, in that future, by the simplest method available. She got out. But the flash-forward is a single episode. A glimpse through a window that closes when the episode ends. Lisa returns to being 8. The window closes. Springfield has her back. The show cannot let Lisa grow up and leave Springfield, because if Lisa grows up and leaves Springfield, the show's most fundamental argument about the cost of intelligence in this community is resolved in a way that removes the tension. The tragedy of Lisa requires her to stay inside the thing that cannot accommodate her. The moment she escapes, she is no longer tragic. She is just someone who managed to leave a difficult situation, which is its own kind of story but not the one the show is telling. Lisa stays because the show needs her to stay, but the show has never been naive about what that staying costs her. Look at the saxophone. Lisa plays not because anyone in Springfield appreciates it. She plays because it is the language that the rest of her vocabulary cannot reach. When words are insufficient and argument is futile and the wall is still the wall, after every effort to communicate past it, there is still the saxophone. There is still the capacity to make something that is purely and completely what it is, that does not require anyone else's understanding to have meaning, that exists whether or not Springfield is listening. The saxophone is what Lisa has instead of Springfield's attention. It is, in its quiet way, enough. And the show understands that it should not be enough. And that understanding is one of the things that makes The Simpsons more than a cartoon about a cartoon family. Under the radiation theory, Lisa's intelligence might be its own mutation, a different expression of the same environmental cause that diminished Homer. The same contaminated water, the same irradiated air, but expressed in Lisa's biology as cognitive amplification rather than cognitive reduction. If Maggie represents the extreme version of this pattern, Lisa might be the intermediate expression. Intelligence elevated significantly above the Springfield baseline, but not to the incomprehensible level the youngest Simpson seems to inhabit. If the coma theory is true, Lisa's brilliance in the dream is Homer's recognition of what his daughter was. He could see, before the vending machine fell, that Lisa was exceptional. He could see that Springfield was not going to give her what she needed, and that he did not know how to fix that gap. And in the dream, he makes her as extraordinary as she actually was, because the dream is where all the things he noticed but could not address take the shape they deserved. Homer's dream of Lisa is a father's acknowledgement of a daughter he did not know how to help but never stopped watching. And in the dream, she keeps playing. Every Friday night, the saxophone, every episode, the sound of someone who has decided that the gap between herself and the world around her is not the final fact about either of them, that something exists beyond the gap, that the music reaches somewhere the words cannot. Springfield cannot contain that. It has tried for 36 years. The music keeps going. Section 17. What it means to come home to Springfield. There is a phenomenon that happens to people who watch The Simpsons during the Golden Age and then return to those episodes as adults. It is not nostalgia exactly, or not only that, it is something more specific. The experience of encountering a piece of entertainment that was designed to be funny and finding that it has become, over the years, something closer to true. Episodes that seemed primarily to be comedies about Homer's incompetence reveal themselves on return to be studies in the specific texture of a particular kind of love. The love of people who are imperfect in ways they cannot easily articulate or manage, who cause harm to the people they care most about and cannot stop causing it, who nevertheless keep trying in the specific ways available to them. Homer's love for his family is not a sophisticated love. It is not eloquent or measured or wise, but it is constant. It is the one thing about Homer that never flags, never gets lazy, never becomes something he stops putting everything he has into. Bart and Homer strangle each other, literally, as a recurring visual gag. But Bart never doubts, in any episode, in any season, that his father loves him. The strangling is how Homer processes Bart's provocations. Underneath the strangling is a man who wants his son and his son's attention, and his son's safety with an intensity that he can only express through the specific, limited vocabulary available to someone like Homer. The strangling is the wrong tool, but the feeling it is expressing is real and deep. Marge's patience is often discussed in terms of what she gives up for it. She has artistic talent that gets expressed once and then suppressed. She has ambitions that surface occasionally and then get absorbed back into the maintenance of the household. She has a life that sometimes feels, when you look at it from the outside, like a demonstration of what women were expected to sacrifice in mid-century America still being performed, somehow, in a contemporary context. But Marge chose Homer. Repeatedly. The show has depicted the moments when she could have chosen differently, when she was looking at a different version of her life and deciding which path to take. And she chose Homer each time. Not because she did not understand what she was choosing, because she understood what she was choosing and decided that Homer, specifically Homer, was worth the choosing. That is not a passive life. That is someone who knows what they want and keeps choosing it. The Simpsons has always been, underneath everything, a love story. A specific and peculiar and somewhat dysfunctional love story, but a love story between Homer and Marge, obviously. Between Homer and his children, between the show and its audience, between a very specific version of American domestic life and the people who recognized something in that depiction and did not want to let it go. The theories we have examined tonight all have something to say about the love story. The radiation theory says the love story is happening inside a contamination zone, and everybody involved is damaged in ways they cannot fully see. The coma theory says the love story is a dying man's dream of the thing he most wants to hold on to. The collective denial theory says the love story is sustained by a community that has agreed not to look too closely at its own foundations. The Burns immortality theory says the love story is happening in the shadow of a system that does not care about love and has never been required to. All of these things are true. The love story is happening inside a contamination zone. It is possible that it is a dream. It is sustained by collective denial. It is happening in the shadow of a system that does not care. And it is still a love story, still real within its own terms, still worth watching, still worth the time we have spent in Springfield tonight. That is the thing that all the theories taken together cannot finally reduce. The reason we press pause in 1989 and keep it pressed is not because we fail to see the contamination, or the corruption, or the impossibility of it all. It is because we see all of those things and find, at the center of them, a family choosing each other. Imperfectly. Continuously, without any particular reason to believe it will work out except the stubborn, Homer-shaped insistence that it will. We keep watching because the family keeps choosing each other, and because somewhere in the watching, we keep finding something that reminds us to do the same. Come home to Springfield whenever you need to. It will be there. The yellow light in the windows, the couch gag playing, Homer coming through the door. The family is on the couch. They are always on the couch. They were on the couch in 1989 and they will be on the couch in whatever year you are reading this. Which is a statement so improbable that it has become, over 3.5 decades, something close to a fact of the world. Springfield goes on. The loop goes around. The credits roll and the show begins again. Fresh. The same family in the same house on the same street, waiting for you to sit down with them. They have been waiting since the 17th of December, 1989. They will be waiting whenever you come back. That is the whole thing. That is the entire story. 36 years, nearly 800 episodes, every mystery and every theory and every buried detail and every impossible reset, all of it in service of one simple fact. Homer always finds his way home. And so do we. Sleep well. Section 18. Bart Simpson, the boy who never grew up, and what that costs him. There is a version of Bart Simpson that the show almost never allows to the surface. Not the Bart of the catchphrases, not the Bart who slides down banisters and puts worms in Lisa's lunch, and generally fulfills the function of cartoon troublemaker that his name was designed to advertise. That Bart is real too, and he is entertaining, and the show needs him to exist. But underneath the performance, underneath the constant forward motion and the noise and the unfocused energy of a 10-year-old boy who has never found a productive outlet for everything he is capable of, there is another Bart. The one who cried after passing his test. the one who secretly learned to read so he could understand the poem that made his teacher emotional, the one who practiced his skateboard trick again and again in secret because he needed to be good at something that was genuinely his. That Bart appears in fragments, scattered across dozens of episodes, and then disappears again behind the persona the show requires. The tension between the two versions of Bart is one of the most honest things the show has done about boyhood, specifically about the experience of being a boy who is more than the category he has been placed in, and who does not have the tools to communicate that gap or the environment that would reward doing so. Bart is smart, not in the ways Lisa is smart, not in the analytical and linguistic registers that get recognized and rewarded by the systems his community uses to evaluate intelligence. But he is perceptive and socially astute in ways that exceed his age. He understands people's motivations with a speed that is remarkable. He identifies leverage and opportunity with an instinctive precision. He runs schemes that require multi-step planning and accurate modeling of other people's behavior. He has the kind of intelligence that environments like Springfield rarely cultivate because it does not express itself through the channels those environments have built to recognize intelligence. What Springfield gives Bart is a label: problem child, underachiever, the kid who will not amount to anything, the kid whose teachers have given up on before the year properly begins. The diagnosis precedes the child. The category is established before the actual person inside it has a full chance to develop outside it. Bart has absorbed this label. He performs it with dedication because performing what the environment expects is easier than fighting the expectation, and because somewhere along the way the label and the self started to blur together in the way they always do when you are told what you are before you know who you are. He is the problem child. He acts like the problem child. He gets the treatment the problem child gets. And none of this is examined within the show's Springfield as a failure of the institution rather than a failure of the individual. The radiation theory connects to Bart in a particular way. If the contamination affects different people differently, if it can supercharge Maggie's intelligence while devastating Homer's, what has it done to Bart? The show never directly answers this. But Bart's intelligence, the kind that goes unrecognized because it does not fit the measuring tools available, might itself be a product of the same environmental factors that produced the other Simpsons, a form of capability that emerged in an environment that did not know how to receive it and therefore left it undeveloped. Consider what Bart might have been in a different place. With a teacher who recognized that his schemes required significant cognitive capacity, just directed toward goals the institution found inconvenient. With a system that responded to his learning style rather than requiring him to adapt to a system designed around a different style. With adults around him who saw the person behind the label and made the distinction explicit. The show has given us glimpses of this Bart too. In the episode where Bart is placed in a class for gifted students through an administrative error and discovers that the environment makes a difference, that he can succeed when the context does not begin with a predetermined verdict. He thrives briefly. Then he goes back. Because Springfield is where the show keeps everyone. The coma theory gives Bart's perpetual 10-year-oldness its saddest reading. Homer's dream cannot age his son because Homer did not live to see it happen. Bart is 10 because Homer last saw him at 10. Every mischief, every scheme, every moment of accidental tenderness, every strangling, it is Homer's memory of his son preserved at the last moment Homer was present enough to experience it. The frozen Bart is Homer's memory of a boy he was only beginning to understand. And in the dream, the understanding never gets further, because the dreamer cannot provide what he was not there to see. Bart remains 10. The understanding remains partial, and that partiality, if the coma theory is right, is one of the quiet tragedies built into every episode that has aired since April 1993. Section 19. The sound of Springfield music, memory, and the show's emotional architecture. The Simpsons has always been a show with an unusually sophisticated relationship with music. Danny Elfman's main title theme is one of the most recognizable pieces of television music in history, a piece that does something technically specific and emotionally interesting in the way it moves through its chord changes, conveying a kind of anxious optimism that is very precisely the feeling the show wants you to arrive with. The theme tells you that things might go wrong but will probably be okay, that the family is chaotic but fundamentally together, that Springfield is bizarre but comprehensible. The couch gag, which varies week to week and has become one of the show's most celebrated creative playgrounds, is always structured around the moment of the family assembling together on the couch. Whatever improbable thing happens before the landing is always the same. 5 people in the same living room, in their positions, facing the television. The music resolves. The family is in place. The episode begins. That resolution is doing something. Every week, for 36 years, before the actual episode content, before the jokes and the story and whatever Springfield is going to do tonight, there is a moment of the family coming together. The chaos gives way to the arrangement. The running gives way to the sitting. The couch gag is a reset ritual, a weekly affirmation that however scattered the family was in the previous 45 seconds of screen time, they are now together. They are always together in the end. Lisa's saxophone does different work. Where the main theme is communal and declarative, Lisa's instrument is private and searching. She plays when she cannot say what she means through other means. She plays when Springfield has been too much of itself, and she needs something that is purely hers. The sound of the saxophone in those moments is the sound of a person who has not given up, who has not allowed the distance between what she knows is possible and what her environment provides to become the final definition of what is possible. The music of the show is one of the things that makes it genuinely difficult to write about, because music operates below the level of argument. You cannot theorize about it with the same tools you use to examine the radiation theory or the coma theory. It just does its work, in your chest, below the level of conscious analysis. The show knows this. It has always known this. The emotional turning points in the best episodes, the moments that have stayed with people for decades, almost always have a specific musical quality to them. Not the comedy cues, not the musical jokes, but the underscore in the moments of genuine feeling. Homer watching Bart sleep in the episode about the baseball. Homer standing in the rain outside a convenience store while a particular piece of music plays. The moment in Mother Simpson when Homer finally understands what happened. These moments work partly because of what the dialogue is doing and partly because of what the music is telling you that the dialogue is not saying. The music of The Simpsons is, in a sense, the show's unconscious. The part of the show that communicates what the jokes and the stories cannot say directly. What it feels like to be inside this family. What it feels like to be inside Springfield. The longing and the love and the specific quality of a life that is not what it was supposed to be but is, somehow, the life being lived. When the main title resolves and the family settles onto the couch, the music is telling you something simple that 36 years have not made less true. They are here. All 5 of them. Together. For the next 22 minutes, whatever happens in Springfield, the family will be on the couch at the start and on the couch at the end. That has been the promise since December 1989. The show has never broken it. Section 20. The weight of 36 years, what staying this long means. There is no precedent in American television for what The Simpsons has done. This is not a statement about quality, or at least not only a statement about quality. It is a statement about duration and about what duration does to a cultural artifact. Most television shows exist in a particular relationship with time. They are produced, they run for some number of seasons, they end, they become part of the cultural record. The relationship between the show and time is sequential. The show happens and then it is over and then time passes and people look back at it. The Simpsons does not have this relationship with time. The Simpsons exists alongside time. It has been running for so long that it has accumulated the kind of relationship with its own cultural moment that used to belong only to long-running institutions, newspapers, religious organizations, governments, things that exist long enough that they outlast the frameworks people used to understand them when they began. When The Simpsons premiered in 1989, it was understood as a response to a particular cultural moment. The Cosby Show decade, the Family Values political climate, the specific anxieties and arrangements of late Reagan and early Bush America. The Simpsons was the counter-programming, the show that looked at the sunny version of American family life that dominated television and said, but what about the other version? The version with the anxiety and the incompetence and the love that does not know how to express itself except awkwardly? That original context has been gone for a long time. The Cosby Show has collapsed under the weight of its creators' crimes in ways that make its status as cultural touchstone impossible to rehabilitate. Reagan and Bush are historical figures now. The specific anxieties of 1989 are buried under 36 years of subsequent anxieties that have compounded and layered on top of them. And The Simpsons is still running, still producing new episodes, still featuring the same family on the same couch in the same house in the same impossible town. What does it mean to watch a show that has outlasted its own context? It means the show has become its own context. Springfield is no longer a response to anywhere specific. It is its own referent. When people want to talk about a certain kind of American community, about a certain kind of American family, about a certain kind of American relationship between power and population, Springfield is the vocabulary they use. Not because Springfield was the original template for those things, but because Springfield was the most sustained and specific depiction of them, produced over a long enough period that the depiction became the definition. The show predicted some things and those predictions went viral, but the more important truth is subtler. The show has been describing something consistently enough and long enough that the description has become part of how the thing is understood. When we see a corrupt local power structure, we see it as Springfield. When we see a community rationalizing harm it should resist, we see Springfield. The show has not predicted the future. The show has become the vocabulary for a certain kind of present. That is a remarkable thing for a cartoon about a cartoon family to have done. It is the kind of cultural work that usually takes considerably longer than 36 years to complete, and usually requires something more obviously serious than an animated sitcom about a man who sleeps at a nuclear safety workstation. The Simpsons did it by being specific, by being patient, by committing to the specific people and the specific place week after week for a span of time that has no real equivalent in the medium, and by never quite letting the family on the couch be only a joke, always keeping something real underneath the joke, always making sure that when the jokes cleared and you were left with Homer and Marge and the 3 children in the house on Evergreen Terrace, there was something there worth the staying. That something is still there, 36 years in. Still underneath all the theories and all the mysteries and all the impossible things that have accumulated in Springfield across 800 episodes. The family is still on the couch. That has always been enough. Section 21. A final walk through Springfield, closing thoughts before sleep. It is late now, wherever you are. Or early. The time when the distinction between the two starts to blur. The time when Springfield feels most like home. Let us take one more slow walk through the town before we put it to rest for the night. Start on Evergreen Terrace. The Simpson house is the one with the slightly overgrown lawn and the car in the driveway and the lights on even though it is past the hour when they should probably be off. Homer is inside. He is on the couch, most likely. There is a beer somewhere nearby, or the intention of a beer. The television is on. The blue light of it flickers in the window. Walk past and let him be. Across the street, Ned Flanders's house is dark and neat and precise. The lawn is perfect, the garden is tended, everything is in its place. From the outside, Ned's house looks like what it presents itself as. The home of a man who has everything ordered, who has made his choices and maintains them. What the outside cannot show you is what it costs him. Walk past Ned's house and let him sleep. Further down the street, Springfield settles into its nighttime arrangements. The tire fire is still burning at the edge of town, as it has been burning for as long as anyone can remember. The orange glow of it is visible from several neighborhoods on a clear night. It is, in its way, one of Springfield's most consistent features. The fire that nobody put out because putting it out would have required someone to decide it was worth putting out, and the decision kept getting deferred, and eventually it became simply part of the landscape. The nuclear plant is visible from the hill, the cooling towers, the reactor buildings, the lights that stay on through the night because reactors do not sleep. The water in the river nearby reflects those lights back at the sky. Somewhere in that facility, Homer's workstation sits empty, the Homer-shaped impression in the chair where he has slept through dozens of alarms across 36 years. The donut crumbs, the safety manual he has technically been given but has not opened in a way that could be called reading. The workstation of a man whose job is to prevent a catastrophe, staffed by the person least equipped to prevent it, maintained in exactly this state by the only person who benefits from the incapacity. Burns's office is several floors above the reactor floor, also dark. Burns sleeps, somehow, in between the weekly treatments that keep him alive. He has been sleeping and waking and making plans in this building for longer than most of the structures around it have existed. He will be awake again before anyone else arrives. He will have made several decisions before Smithers brings the morning schedule. The plant hums. It always hums. Walk past the plant and let it be. Moe's Tavern is closed for the night. The door is locked, but the sign is still lit because Moe forgets to turn it off and nobody is coming back to complain. Inside, the stools are empty and the bar is wiped down, and the smell of 100,000 evenings has settled into the wood in ways that cleaning cannot reach anymore. Mo is somewhere in the back probably. He lives close to the bar because where else would he be? The Quickie Mart is not closed. The Quickie Mart is never closed. Apu is behind the counter, has been behind the counter for years that have added up to something longer than most people commit to anything, and the fluorescent lights hum over him with the same indifference they bring to everything. Springfield Elementary is locked and empty. The classrooms sit in the dark. Bart's seat in Mrs. Krabappel's classroom is empty. Lisa's seat in her classroom is empty. The locker where Bart keeps things he does not want anyone to find is shut. The hallway where Lisa walked with her saxophone case, slightly apart from the other students, slightly alone, is still. The retirement home, the hospital, the church, the police station, where Chief Wiggum may or may not be awake, and where if he is awake, he is probably not awake in any way that would be useful to anyone who needed help tonight. Springfield at night is the same as Springfield in the day, but quieter. The same structures, the same geography, the same relationships between buildings and streets and the people who inhabit them. The same contamination moving through the water. The same plant on the hill. The same impossible sky over a town that cannot decide what state it is in. But at night, the noise settles. The town that never quite sits still becomes, for a few hours, almost still. And in the stillness, you can hear something underneath the usual din. Something that sounds, if you listen for it, like a family, like people choosing each other, like love expressed in the specific imperfect ways that this particular family knows how to express it. Homer is on the couch. Marge is somewhere nearby. The kids are upstairs, asleep or pretending to be. The house is warm with them. That is what the show has always been about, underneath everything. Not the radiation and not the coma and not the mystery of the shooting and not the immortality of the billionaire on the hill. Those things are all there, woven into the fabric of Springfield, available to anyone who looks at the fabric closely enough. They are real within the show's terms. They matter, but they surround the thing at the center. And the thing at the center is 5 people in a house on Evergreen Terrace who are, despite every possible reason not to be, still there for each other. Still choosing each other. Still choosing this. And as long as we keep watching, they always will be. Close your eyes now. Let Springfield settle into the dark behind them. The cooling towers, the yellow light in the windows, Homer finding his way home as he always does by the end of the episode. The family is on the couch. They are always on the couch. They will be there when you wake up. Sleep well. Springfield will wait for you. It always has. Section 22. The Economics of Springfield Class, Labor, and the Plant's Shadow. The Springfield nuclear power plant is not merely an environmental fact in this town. It is an economic one. It is the largest employer in Springfield, the primary source of tax revenue, the institution around which the town's financial life has organized itself for decades. Remove the plant and Springfield does not merely lose its most prominent visible structure. Springfield loses the economic foundation that sustains everything else. The school's funding, the hospital, the municipal services, the local businesses that depend on the paychecks of plant workers, all of it traces back, through some chain of economic dependency, to the reactor on the hill. This is the trap that the radiation theory identifies most chillingly. The thing poisoning Springfield is also the thing keeping Springfield alive. The contamination and the sustenance come from the same source. The poison and the paycheck arrive in the same envelope, and the community's choice, never explicitly made but constantly renewed, is to keep accepting both because refusing one would mean losing the other. This is not a situation unique to Springfield. It describes the economic reality of communities built around single dominant industries across the entirety of American industrial history. The coal town that cannot fight the coal company because the coal company owns the town's future as surely as it owns the mine. The agricultural community that cannot organize against the chemical corporation whose products poison its groundwater because the chemical corporation's contracts are the only thing keeping the farm solvent. The relationship between a dominant industry and a dependent community is one of the oldest and most intractable patterns in American economic life. The Simpsons understood this early. The plant is not a villain because Burns is a cartoon villain, though Burns is definitely also a cartoon villain. The plant is what it is because the structural relationship between industry and community produces these outcomes regardless of anyone's individual intentions or moral qualities. If Burns were replaced tomorrow by a plant manager of impeccable character and genuine concern for public health, the plant would still face the same economic pressures that make the violations rational. The violations exist not because Burns is evil, but because fixing the violations costs money, and not fixing them costs nothing immediately visible. The immediate and the diffuse. The certain cost and the uncertain harm. The economic logic of this calculation produces the violations as reliably as it produced them under Burns, and would produce them under any operator facing the same structural incentives. Homer is the most honest face of this arrangement. He is not a figure of corruption, he is a figure of dependency. His employment at the plant is not a story about corruption or venality. It is a story about what happens to a person who cannot afford to look clearly at what their livelihood costs them, because looking clearly at it would mean choosing between the livelihood and the clarity, and the livelihood is not optional. Homer has children. Homer has a mortgage. Homer has the specific set of obligations that middle-class American life generates, and these obligations organize his behavior as surely as the contamination in the water organizes his cognition. He cannot afford to see the plant clearly. Not because he lacks the intelligence to see it, or not only because of that, because seeing it clearly and then continuing to work there, which is what the obligations require, would be unbearable in ways that the not seeing makes bearable. This is what the show has always been about underneath the jokes. Not Homer's stupidity, Homer's impossible position. A man caught between what he needs to do to keep his family housed and fed, and what seeing that clearly would cost him in terms of being able to live with himself. The fog is not only a product of radiation and crayons, it is a product of necessity. Springfield's working class is caught in this same fog. Lenny and Carl at the plant, Mo behind the bar, the Springfield residents who attend town meetings and complain about problems without ever connecting the problems to the source of their own livelihoods. This is not stupidity. This is the specific cognitive arrangement that a certain economic position requires. You see what you can afford to see. The rest gets managed into the background the way the radiation manages itself into the background over time. The show has depicted several moments when Springfield came close to confronting the economic reality of its situation. The moment when the gubernatorial candidate used Blinky as evidence. The moment when the dome went up and the contamination became impossible to deny. The moment when Mona and her group destroyed Burns's biological weapons facility and thought, briefly, that confronting what Burns was doing could produce change. Each time, the confrontation collapsed back into the normal arrangement, because confronting the arrangement requires giving up something that the people doing the confronting cannot afford to give up. Burns survives every challenge, because every challenge eventually runs into the wall of what Springfield cannot live without. That wall is the plant. The plant is always the wall. Section 23. The Simpsons and American Mythology. What the show says about the stories we tell ourselves. Every culture generates myths. Not myths in the sense of false stories, though some myths are false. Myths in the sense of stories that a culture uses to understand itself. Stories that organize the culture's experience into a shape that feels meaningful. Stories that tell people who they are, what they value, what they are working toward, and what they have come from. American mythology is particularly powerful and particularly contested. The stories Americans tell themselves, about freedom and opportunity, and the specific quality of American possibility, have been the subject of argument for as long as there has been a United States to argue about. The myths and the realities have always been in complicated relation to each other. Sometimes the myth has generated real change by describing a possibility that the culture then worked toward. Sometimes the myth has obscured real harm by providing a story that made the harm easier to not see. The Simpsons entered this mythology from an unexpected angle. It began as satire. It began by puncturing the most visible American myth of its moment, the television family. The Cosby Show version of American family life, and the long tradition of television family life it represented, offered a story about American domestic success. About competent, loving parents and children who learned valuable lessons and problems that resolved within 30 minutes into something that left everyone slightly wiser. The Simpsons said, "But what about the other version? The version where the father is genuinely limited, where the mother is patient almost to the breaking point, where the children are doing their best inside a system that does not always reward their best. The version where the problems do not resolve cleanly and the lessons do not always take, and the family is still there next week, trying again, with everything still unresolved." That puncturing of the idealized myth was the show's original project, and it succeeded so thoroughly that it generated its own mythology. The Simpsons family became, over 36 years, a new kind of American family myth. Not the aspirational version the idealized television family represented. A different version. The real version, or close enough to real that it recognized something. The yellow-skinned family on the couch became the image of American domestic life that most accurately captured what domestic life actually felt like for a generation of people who had grown up watching it. Not because Homer's incompetence is universal, or because every American family has a nuclear plant in the background, but because the gap between what family life is supposed to be and what it actually is, the gap that The Simpsons has always lived in, is universal. Everybody knows that gap. Everybody has felt it from the inside. The show gave people a vocabulary for that gap. It gave people a way of naming the specific experience of a family that loves each other genuinely and fails each other regularly and cannot stop trying. That experience, before The Simpsons, was something you lived but did not quite have language for within the medium of television. The Simpsons provided the language, and once you have the language for something, you can begin to think about it differently. That is the show's real cultural contribution, not the predictions. Not the continuity mysteries, not the theories about radiation and comas and the immortality of billionaires. Those things are all real and interesting within the show's framework. But the cultural contribution is simpler and more durable. The Simpsons told the truth about something that the dominant myths of its moment were not telling the truth about. And it told that truth consistently and specifically, across 36 years and nearly 800 episodes, until the truth it was telling became part of how people understood their own lives. That is what mythology does. When it works, it gives experience a shape. It provides vocabulary for what was previously inarticulate. It makes the interior legible from the outside. The Simpsons made the interior legible. The interior of a family, the interior of a community, the interior of a working-class life in an American town that exists at the intersection of genuine love and genuine compromise. And having made it legible, it keeps describing it. Week after week, season after season, the same family, the same house, the same town, describing the same truth in 36 years worth of different ways. The loop is the mythology. The repetition is the point. The family keeps being there because the truth they embody keeps being true. Section 24. Secondary loves the relationships that hold Springfield together. The big love story of The Simpsons is Homer and Marge. The show has returned to it hundreds of times, examined it from dozens of angles, threatened it in ways large and small, and restored it episode after episode with a consistency that begins to feel like its own kind of argument. These two people, improbably matched, persistently committed, will not finally separate no matter what the episode puts in the way. Their marriage is the spine of the show. But underneath the main story, there are other love stories, smaller ones that the show does not always announce. But they are there, built into the relationships between characters who the show treats as background players, but who carry something real inside the logic of their interactions. Lenny and Carl? The show has circled around the specific nature of their attachment for 36 years without ever committing to a direct statement about it, maintaining the kind of productive ambiguity that allows the relationship to be whatever the viewer needs it to be. What is unambiguous is the depth of it. These are two people who have organized their adult lives around each other's presence to a degree that goes well beyond workplace friendship. They appear together in contexts unrelated to the plant. They consult each other before significant decisions. They are, in the practical sense, each other's most consistent point of reference in the world. Whatever the show intends by this, and the show has been coy about its intentions across 3 decades, the practical reality of Lenny and Carl's relationship is one of the show's quieter depictions of love. Two people in Springfield who found something worth organizing their lives around and have been doing it for years. Smithers and Burns. The emotional asymmetry of this relationship is one of the show's most sustained and genuinely sad characterizations. Smithers has devoted his life to a man who requires his devotion for biological survival and who cannot return the feeling in any conventional sense. The devotion is not merely professional. The show has made clear across decades of episodes that Smithers experiences his attachment to Burns as something deeper than employment. And Burns, who has been alive for more than a century, who has accumulated more knowledge and more strategic intelligence than anyone else in Springfield, cannot offer reciprocity in any of the forms that Smithers would want it. This is the tragedy of the relationship. Not that it is one-sided, which is visible, but that the side Smithers occupies is the side where all the feeling lives, and the side Burns occupies is the side where the feeling's absence is absolute and could not be otherwise. Burns is not capable of what Smithers wants from him. Burns has been alive for so long, has accumulated so many layers of self-preservation strategy, has had so many experiences of loss and betrayal and the specific dangers that come with being extraordinarily wealthy and extraordinarily powerful, that the vulnerability required for the kind of attachment Smithers carries has been unavailable to him for a very long time, if it was ever available. Smithers loves Burns. Burns needs Smithers. The distinction between those two things is the entirety of their relationship, and the show has been honest about that distinction even while finding comedy in it. Then there is the relationship between Homer and Barney Gumble, which is love, specifically the love of two people who have known each other so long and in such specific circumstances that the relationship has passed through every stage of friendship and come out the other side into something more permanent. Barney is the person Homer drinks with, the person Homer has known the longest outside his family, the person whose presence in the booth at Moe's is simply part of the architecture of Homer's adult life, as natural and unconsidered as the booth itself. The show has been honest about Barney's alcoholism in ways that were unusual for a network comedy when the show began. His decline is depicted with specificity. The moments when Barney briefly recovers, when he finds something in himself that can exist outside the constant management of the alcohol, are treated with genuine hope rather than as set up for a joke. And the moments when he returns to it are not played as punchlines either, but as the thing they actually are, a person losing a battle they have been fighting for a long time. Homer loves Barney in the way that you love someone you have been alongside for decades, and who you cannot help and cannot stop caring about, and who appears every week at the same stool in the same bar and is simply there, as they have always been there, for as long as you can remember. That is also love. The specific, long-term, unconditional, practically useless, and still completely real love of people who have shared enough life that their presence in each other's world has become indistinguishable from the world itself. Springfield's love stories are not usually announced. They are simply there, built into the relationships between people who have been in each other's orbit long enough that the orbits have become load-bearing. Take any one of them away and something collapses. The town is held together by these attachments, not by its institutions which are compromised, or its economy which is poisoned, or its geography which is impossible, or its memory which is unreliable, by the specific fact of these people having been in these relationships for this long and not stopping. That is the thing that keeps Springfield from simply dissolving into the contamination and the denial and the institutional failure that surrounds it. The attachments. The love stories, announced and unannounced. The fact that these specific people have been choosing these specific other people for years now, for decades, for the entirety of the show's run. The town is its relationships. The relationships are its people. The people are damaged and compromised and limited and improbably committed to each other. That is Springfield. That is, finally, what 36 years of theories and mysteries and impossible events and collective forgetting has been circling. A town full of people who are stuck with each other and who have decided, largely, to make the best of it, to show up at Moe's and the plant and the school and the church and to be imperfectly present for each other. The contamination is real. The coma might be real. The mystery of who shot Burns remains genuinely open. The immortal billionaire on the hill keeps the plant running, and the treatments coming, and the system sustained. And underneath all of it, underneath every impossible thing about Springfield, there is a community, damaged and strange and yellow-skinned and four-fingered, but a community. People who chose to be here, or could not leave, or both, and who have been navigating the specific shape of this life together for as long as the show has been running. That is not nothing. In a world where the systems fail and the institutions disappoint and the contamination is real and the truth gets exiled on a train, that is not nothing. It might be, when you look at it clearly, everything that matters. Section 25. Before you sleep, a final word from Springfield. You have been in Springfield for a long time tonight. The theories have been laid out, the mysteries examined, the buried details brought up into the light where they can be looked at directly, even if they cannot finally be resolved. We have walked through every theory that has accumulated around this show across 36 years of devoted attention from people who looked at a cartoon family and found something underneath the cartoon worth spending serious time with. The radiation theory, the coma theory, The shooting mystery, Burns's impossible survival, Maggie's silence, Mona's exile, the predictions and what they actually mean, the geographic impossibility, the floating timeline, the collective denial that is Springfield's fundamental operating principle, the principle and the pauper, and what it tells you about how communities maintain comfortable lives. The supporting cast and what they reveal about the show's understanding of class and labor and love, the economics of dependency, the mythology. All of it circles the same thing. A family on a couch. 5 people who have been choosing each other for 36 years inside a town that keeps giving them reasons not to and will never run out of reasons not to. The Simpsons will be there next Sunday, and the Sunday after that, and however many Sundays it takes to bring the show to whatever end it eventually reaches, at which point the reruns will begin and the show will continue anyway, in that different register, in that perpetual present tense that reruns create. Bart will be 10, Lisa will be 8, Maggie will be 1, holding her pacifier, watching everything, waiting for the moment to say what she has always known. Homer will come through the door at the end of the episode and find his way to the couch. He always finds his way to the couch. Marge will be there, patient and complex and in love with someone who does not deserve it and who has never stopped trying to anyway, which is its own kind of deservingness. The family will be together. Springfield will be there. The theories will remain, unanswered, waiting for whoever wants to pick them up and examine them the way you have been examining them tonight. They are not problems to be solved. They are invitations. They are the show saying, if you look at this carefully, you will find something underneath the joke. You will find something true about how power works, how communities maintain themselves, how love persists in environments designed to make love difficult, how people get broken and keep trying anyway. You will find Springfield. And in Springfield, as always, you will find something that looks, if you tilt your head at just the right angle, like home. Let the show settle behind your eyes. The yellow light, the cooling towers, the tire fire, the couch. Homer is home. He is always home. The family is together. They are always together. Sleep well. Springfield will be here when you wake up. That is the whole story. That has always been the whole story. Section 26. The slow hours drifting through Springfield at night. This section is for the listeners who are still awake, or mostly awake, or somewhere in between, which is the state that these long night sessions tend to produce eventually. The state where the words reach you but do not fully land, where the images float through without demanding that you hold them, where Springfield becomes less a place you are examining and more a place you are simply inside of, the way you are inside a dream, without needing to know the architecture. We are going to slow down here. We are going to take our time with some of the quieter corners of Springfield, the parts of the town that do not usually get much attention, the moments between the jokes, the spaces between the stories, the texture of the place in its ordinary and unremarkable hours. Let us start at the power plant, because the power plant is where so many of the threads run. At 3 in the morning, the plant is staffed by whoever drew the night shift, not Homer, who is the kind of person who, if he were scheduled for the night shift, would find a way to accidentally schedule himself for a different shift, or would sleep through it, or would show up and then fall asleep in such a way that the act of falling asleep was technically a form of showing up. But someone is there, some version of a Springfield resident, shaped by the same forces that shaped all of the others, sitting in front of monitoring equipment and watching the numbers and trying to stay awake in the specific, difficult way that night shift workers have always had to try. The reactor is on. It is always on. The cooling towers release their steady plume of steam into the night sky. The water circulates. The control rods sit in their positions, adjusted to maintain the chain reaction at the level that keeps the lights on in Springfield's houses without the whole thing becoming something else. The radiation moves through the walls in the way that radiation moves. Steady, invisible, accumulating at the slow rate that makes it possible to ignore for years, for decades, until the accumulation has been happening long enough that the question of whether the accumulation is harmful is not really a question anymore. It is just a fact that nobody has said out loud yet. The river reflects the plant's lights back at itself. Somewhere in that river, if you were looking, you might see the descendants of Blinky, the three-eyed fish's lineage, continuing in the water downstream from the discharge point, a population that has made its genetic peace with the specific conditions the plant produces. Or you might not see them. It is night and dark. and the water moves in ways that make it difficult to see what is below the surface. That is true of most things in Springfield. Move away from the plant and further into town. The residential streets at this hour are quiet in the specific way that residential streets are quiet when everyone is asleep. The houses are dark, except for the occasional porch light that someone forgot to turn off. The cars are in the driveways. The sounds are the sounds that towns make when the people in them are not making noise. The occasional dog in the distance, the wind in the trees that line Evergreen Terrace, the sound of a house settling in the way houses settle when the temperature drops, and the materials that make up a house contract slightly, and the resulting sounds have been misinterpreted as ghosts for the entirety of human civilization's experience of living in structures. The Simpson house is one of the ones with the porch light on. It is often the one with the porch light on. At some point in the show's 36 years, someone in the family turned that porch light on and forgot to turn it off, and it has been on ever since. A small and accidental beacon on Evergreen Terrace. There is something right about that. Homer finds his way home partly because the light is on. The accidental beacon. The forgotten porch light that became, through the logic of the show's repetition, something like an intention. Move past the houses and toward the elementary school. Springfield Elementary at night is the specific kind of empty that schools achieve when the children have gone home, and the administrative activity has ceased, and the building is simply itself, without anyone in it requiring it to be anything. The hallways are quiet. The classrooms are dark, except where a lamp was left on somewhere, a teacher's desk lamp maybe, casting a small pool of light over a pile of papers that will be there in the morning waiting to be graded. Bart's desk is in the third row from the window. His name is scratched into the wood surface in a place that is technically on the underside of the desk and therefore technically invisible to anyone looking at the desk in the normal way. Lisa's classroom is down the hall and 2 doors to the left. Her desk is in the front row, center. She always chooses the front row, center, which is information about who she is that most people in Springfield have never found worth examining. The music room is at the end of the hall. The instruments are in their cases. Lisa's saxophone is not here, she takes it home. But the other instruments are arranged in their storage positions, waiting for the morning and whoever is going to try to play them. Outside, the playground is empty in the specific way that children's playgrounds are empty at night, with a quality that is slightly melancholy and slightly expectant at the same time. The swings are still. The slide is cool from the night air. The jungle gym stands in the dark like a structure that does not quite know what it is when nobody is using it. This is Springfield without the noise. The town that is always so full of incident and argument and disaster, and the specific quality of energy that comes from a large cast of characters all existing in the same space simultaneously, gone quiet, gone still, resting between one episode and the next. The tire fire burns at the edge of town as it always does. The orange glow of it is visible from the playground. From here, on a clear night, you can also see the cooling towers, the plant's lights, the river's reflected gleam, and further, if the air is clear enough, the hills beyond Springfield. Whatever hills those are, in whatever state Springfield is located tonight. They are dark and quiet and they do not care what happens in the town below them. They have been there longer than the plant, and they will be there after the plant, and the town and the dome and the whole story have concluded and passed into whatever kind of memory animated shows pass into. Come back to the town. Come back to Evergreen Terrace. The porch light is on. Homer is on the couch. He always finds his way there. Section 27. The Theories Revisited, a slow pass through everything we examined. It is deep in the night now. The kind of time when going back over something has a different quality than going over it in daylight. The thoughts come slower. The connections feel more tentative and more true at the same time. The certainty of daytime argument gives way to the quieter mode of nighttime consideration. Let us go back through the theories one more time. Slowly, without the urgency of establishing them, just letting them rest in the air. The radiation theory. The plant has been running for decades. The violations have been accumulating. The three-eyed fish appeared in Season 2 and the community moved past it. The residents are yellow-skinned and four-fingered, and the visitors are not. Burns undergoes treatments that keep him alive through what amounts to managed radioactive exposure, and the treatments cause him to glow in the dark. All of this is in the show. It has always been in the show. The theory does not add anything to the evidence. It simply invites you to look at the evidence directly and follow where it leads. Where it leads is uncomfortable. The most comfortable explanation, That the yellow skin and four fingers are just the art style, and the plant's violations are just background jokes, and Blinky was just a one-episode gag, is also the explanation that keeps you from having to confront what the show has been quietly constructing across 36 years of accumulated detail. The radiation theory says, look at what the show has been showing you. It has been showing you this the whole time. The fish, the bones, the treatments, the cognitive patterns that match exactly what long-term low-level exposure produces in humans and other organisms. The difference between inside the contamination zone and outside it. The theory invites discomfort. The discomfort is the point. The coma theory. The 1st of April 1993. Homer's brain flatlines. He loses 5% of his cognitive function. The show tells you he woke up. The coma theory says the show has been lying to you ever since, in the kindest possible way. Because if Homer is dreaming, the dream is not a nightmare. The dream is everything he loves, preserved exactly as he left it, cycling endlessly through variations of the life he had, his children not aging, his wife not changing, his house on Evergreen Terrace, the cold beer, the couch, a man's deepest and most ordinary heaven. Just this, just them, just the house on Evergreen Terrace in the eternal Springfield summer. The coma theory does not ruin the show. It makes every episode an act of unconscious love. The dreamer refusing to let the story end, because ending the story means coming back to a world where 30-some years have passed, and his children have grown up without him, and he does not know what became of any of them. The theory invites grief. The grief is the point. The collective denial theory. The Principal and the Pauper spelled it out in 1997 and has been getting criticized for it ever since. A town that votes to keep the lie, a truth that gets tied to a train and exiled. A judge who makes it illegal to remember. The show presented this as extreme and the fans received it as extreme. But the show has been depicting exactly this mechanism for its entire run. The dome happened and was forgotten. The sun was blocked and was forgotten. Every catastrophe gets processed through the same machine and comes out the other side as something that happened once and does not need to be discussed anymore. The denial is not passive. It is active. It requires effort. It requires the continuous renewal of the agreement not to see, not to connect, not to follow the three-eyed fish back to its source and ask what else is being affected. The denial is the show's most honest depiction of how communities actually work. Not Springfield specifically, communities generally. The specific machinery of comfortable omission that every community employs to some degree, that some communities employ to extreme degrees. That is, in Springfield, the primary mechanism by which an impossible situation is sustained as ordinary life. The theory invites recognition. The recognition is uncomfortable. The discomfort is the point. And all of the theories together point at the same thing at the center. A family, 5 people. The house on Evergreen Terrace. The couch. 36 years of choosing each other despite every structural pressure against it. That is what the theories are protecting. All the darkness and the contamination and the denial and the immortal billionaire on the hill, all of it is the context in which a family lives their ordinary, impossible, continuing life. The context is real. The family is real. Both things are true simultaneously. That is what the show is. Both things at once. The darkness and the love. The contamination and the couch. The impossible situation and the people inside it, choosing each other, in the only ways available to them, for 36 years and counting. Let that settle. Let the theories rest now. You have carried them far enough tonight. Let Springfield go quiet. The tire fire burns, the plant hums, the river reflects the light. Homer is home. He is always home. Section 28. Long into the night. The texture of Springfield hours. The night is long in Springfield. It has always been long. The town that cannot decide what state it is in also cannot quite decide what hour it is. The rhythms of Springfield have always been slightly off from the rhythms of the outside world, slightly out of phase. The way that places inside contamination zones, or inside dreams, or inside communities that have agreed to live by different rules than the rules outside, are slightly out of phase. The light changes slowly over the town. The sky over the plant is never fully dark. The cooling tower steam catches whatever light there is and holds it. The river carries the reflection downstream and loses it in the current. The hills beyond Springfield begin to show the first suggestion of a change in the sky toward morning, so gradually that you cannot say exactly when it starts. Inside the Simpson house, Homer sleeps in the specific way Homer sleeps. Deeply, heavily, without apparent awareness of the complexity of everything that surrounds his sleep. The theories and the mysteries and the accumulated evidence of a contaminated town and a possibly dreaming brain do not interrupt him. He is asleep. He is, in sleep, as uncomplicated as he is in the best moments of waking life. A man resting, a father resting, dreaming of something, of his family probably, of the couch and the cold beer and the things that are simply good without requiring explanation. Marge is awake, or close to awake. She often is, at this hour. The particular kind of awareness that comes with being the person in a household who tracks everything, who maintains the running inventory of what needs doing and what has been done and what is likely to go wrong before it goes wrong. The person whose sleep is lighter because the responsibility of the household has asked her brain to stay available in ways that Homer's does not have to be. She is thinking about something. She is always thinking about something. The show has not always taken the time to ask what it is. But it is there, behind the patient face, and the patient smile, and the specific quality of love she maintains for a family that tests it constantly. A person with an interior life that the show has glimpsed in fragments and never fully explored. Bart is asleep in the way that young boys sleep. Immediately, completely, without transition. He was awake, and then he was not. The day, whatever it contained, has been set aside. The schemes and the pranks and the moments of accidental tenderness and the persistent effort of performing who he is supposed to be, all of it resting until morning. Lisa is possibly still awake. Lisa sometimes reads past the hour when she should be sleeping, when the household is quiet enough to read without interruption, when the saxophone has said what it had to say and there is still something in the silence that needs filling. She reads things that nobody else in her family would read, that nobody in her immediate social world would read. She reads toward the version of herself that she can see in the distance, the version that lives in a different place and has access to a different scale of conversation. She is working toward it, one book at a time, one night at a time, with the patience that comes from being 8 years old and already understanding that the work is long. Maggie is asleep. Maggie is, as always, impossible to read, the pacifier in place, the enormous eyes closed. Whatever is happening behind those closed eyes is what has always been happening behind them, something the show has chosen to protect by leaving it unnamed. She is planning something, or she is dreaming of the caterpillar, or she is simply asleep, in the most ordinary sense, an infant in a house in a town in a state that nobody can name with certainty. All 5 of them, under one roof, in the house on Evergreen Terrace. Let them rest. The night will be over soon enough. Springfield will wake up and begin its next episode. Homer will drive to work and something will go wrong and eventually something else will go right and the family will be together at the end, as they always are. But for now, the house is dark. The porch light is on, the forgotten beacon. And inside, 5 people are sleeping. They are always there. They will always be there. The loop does not break. The timeline floats. The story continues. And somewhere in a town that cannot be found on any reliable map, in a house, on a street that does not quite exist in any verifiable geography, the Simpsons sleep. They are together. They are always together. That is enough. That has always been enough. Good night, Springfield. The fire will still be burning when you wake up. The plant will still be running. The river will still be moving toward wherever the river goes. And the family will be on the couch. As they were. As they are. As they will always be. Section 29. Rewatching what changes when you see it again. There is a particular experience that people have when they return to The Simpsons after years away. After you have watched the Golden Age episodes once, when they aired or shortly after, and then moved through years of your own life, and then, at some point in the future, you sit down and watch one of the early episodes again. And something has changed. Not in the episode is the same. Something in you has changed, and the episode, which was already designed to be honest about a certain kind of human experience, is now being encountered by a person who has more of that experience behind them. The episode about Bart's test. You watched it as a child and you identified with Bart and you felt the relief of the snow and the second chance. You watch it as an adult and you see Homer and Marge sitting in the school hallway waiting for the result and you understand something different. You understand the specific quality of fear that parents feel when they cannot fix a thing their child is struggling with. When the outcome is not within their power to determine, and they have to simply sit and wait and hope, the episode has not changed. You have changed. The show held space for both readings simultaneously, and you can only access them in sequence, as your life provides the experience that unlocks them. That is one of the things that great storytelling does. It is designed to be encountered multiple times, across multiple phases of life, and to reveal different layers with each encounter. Most television is consumed once and then remembered or not. The Golden Age Simpsons episodes are among the relatively small number of television hours that actually hold up to the second encounter, the third, the fourth, not just as nostalgia but as new experience. The episode about Maggie's first word. The episode about the substitute teacher. The episode about Homer's mother. The episode about the baseball diamond. The episode where Homer draws the card for Marge and the card says, "I love you." These are episodes that were already doing something more than making you laugh when you first encountered them, and that continue doing it differently as the years accumulate. Rewatching is one of the ways that Springfield becomes a place you know rather than a place you visited. You have been there enough times that you understand its geography, in the way you understand the geography of places you have actually lived in. You know which way the plant is from the school. You know the layout of Moe's and the bar stools and the position of the television behind the bar. You know the specific quality of light that the show gives to the Simpson house in the afternoon. You know the people. You know how Homer moves when he is ashamed of something he cannot quite name. You know the specific sound of Marge's worry, the specific register her voice takes when she is managing something painful with patience. You know Bart's tells, the moments when the performance slips and the actual person shows through. You know what it means when Lisa plays at a particular time of evening. You know Springfield. Not completely, not in the way that you know a real place you have lived in for years, but in the way that you know a place you have returned to many times, over many years, and that has shown you different things each time. The show has been designing itself to be known this way. 36 years of the same characters in the same town, accumulating detail, allowing the detail to settle into understanding over time. The long-form patient project of building a place that rewards sustained attention. Most television makes itself available immediately. It delivers its content in the first encounter and has little left for the second. The Simpsons has always had more waiting underneath the surface of what it delivers immediately. More waiting for the viewer who comes back. More waiting for the viewer who stays. That is what 36 years produces. When the work is genuinely good, a place that keeps revealing itself. Keep coming back to Springfield. It will keep showing you things. Section 30, the last hour letting go of Springfield for tonight. We have covered an enormous amount of ground tonight. The origins of the show and the 15-minute invention of a family in a waiting room in Los Angeles in 1987. The Golden Age and what made it extraordinary. The radiation theory and what the three-eyed fish has been saying all along. The coma and what it would mean if Homer never woke up. The shooting and why Maggie's guilt is less settled than the show wanted you to believe. Burns and his impossible century-long survival. Maggie and her deliberate silence. Mona and the 3 generations of damage that one man's grudge produced. The predictions and the confirmation bias that makes them seem like prophecy. The geography and the useful impossibility of locating Springfield on any reliable map. The floating timeline and the collective denial, and the principle and the pauper, and everything they say about how communities maintain lies. The supporting cast and their love stories, and the economics of dependency. And then the slow walk through Springfield at night. The theories one more time, quietly. The house on Evergreen Terrace and the porch light that is always on. It is time to let it rest for tonight. Springfield will be there tomorrow. The same town, the same family, the same impossible loop, the same unresolved mysteries waiting for anyone who wants to pick them up and carry them a little further. But for now, the night has gone on long enough. The questions have been held up to the light for long enough. The theories have been assembled and examined and set down. What remains is the family. 5 people on a couch, in a house, in a town that cannot be found on a map, choosing each other, continuing. As they have been doing since the 17th of December 1989, and as they will continue doing for however long the show runs and whatever comes after, Homer is home. He found his way back, as he always does. The journey was improbable and chaotic and produced several intermediate catastrophes, as it always does, and then he was home. Marge is there, patient and complex and present. Bart is there, 10 years old and mischievous and tender underneath the mischief in the specific way that 10-year-old boys are tender when they do not have to perform otherwise. Lisa is there, 8 years old and brilliant and lonely, and still reaching towards something she can see from here, but cannot quite touch, still playing her saxophone in the evenings when the words are not enough. And Maggie, watching everything, saying nothing, knowing more than any of them know she knows. They are together. They are always together. Let that be the last thing you hold tonight. Not the contamination or the coma or the mystery of the shooting. Not the immortal billionaire or the impossible geography or the timeline that floats above ordinary time. Not the theories, as real and interesting as they are. The family on the couch. 5 people choosing each other in a town that gives them every reason not to. Still there. Still choosing. The porch light is on. Come home to Evergreen Terrace whenever you need to. It will be there. They will be there. The loop goes around and around and around, and Homer always finds his way home. Sleep now. Springfield will wait. Section 31. Legacy: what 36 years actually built. There will come a day when The Simpsons ends. Not soon, probably. The show has survived every prediction of its imminent conclusion for more than 20 years. Every announcement that the golden age was over, every ratings decline, every cultural moment that seemed to suggest the show had finally run its course. It has outlasted every prediction about it, which is possibly the most Springfield thing it has ever done. But it will end. All things end. The couch gag will play for the last time. The main title will resolve for the last time. Homer will find his way home in the final episode, and the credits will roll, and there will not be another episode after that one. When that day comes, the question of legacy will be unavoidable. What did The Simpsons actually build across 36 years and nearly 800 episodes? The case that is easiest to make is the cultural one. The Simpsons changed what American television comedy was allowed to be. Before the show, primetime animation was understood to be for children. The Flintstones model. The Jetsons model. Animation as a delivery mechanism for content designed for young audiences or for family audiences on Saturday mornings. The Simpsons demonstrated, definitively and at the level of commercial success that the industry pays attention to, that animated television for adults was viable, that adults would watch it, that adults would keep watching it. Every adult animated series that followed owes something to what The Simpsons proved. Family Guy, South Park, Futurama, Archer, Bob's Burgers, BoJack Horseman, Rick and Morty. The entire ecosystem of adult animation that has expanded dramatically across streaming and cable in the decades since 1989 exists in a world that The Simpsons made possible by establishing the audience and demonstrating the format. That is not a small thing. That is a reshaping of what television was understood to be. The second case is the language case. The Simpsons generated an enormous number of phrases, references, and cultural touchstones that entered ordinary American conversation and have not left it. Dough, Homer's expression of exasperation, was added to the Oxford English Dictionary. The phrase, "everything's coming up Millhouse," has a specific meaning in American vernacular. The monorail episode can be referenced between strangers who both know the show, and the reference carries a specific weight about the nature of charismatic salesmanship and collective credulity. The Simpsons gave people vocabulary for things they experienced, but did not previously have words for. Language shapes thought. The words available to you for describing an experience affect how you think about that experience. The Simpsons gave people a specific vocabulary for a specific set of experiences, and those experiences have been thought about differently ever since by people who carry that vocabulary. The third case is the emotional one, and it is the one that is hardest to quantify but probably the most significant. The Simpsons gave people a version of family life they could recognize. Not the aspirational version. Not the version where the father is competent and the children learn their lessons and everything resolves cleanly. The version where the love is real and the competence is limited and the problems persist and the family keeps trying anyway. A generation of people grew up watching Homer love his family imperfectly, watching Marge maintain patience that should have run out years ago, watching Bart perform who he was supposed to be and occasionally let the actual person show through. Watching Lisa reach toward a world that could not quite contain her. Watching Maggie understand everything and say nothing. And that generation recognized something in those images. The specific recognition of seeing something true about your own experience reflected back at you from a piece of fiction. The recognition that is one of the things art is for. The Simpsons gave that recognition to an enormous number of people, across 36 years, consistently. That is the legacy that does not diminish when you account for the later seasons, or the cultural reckonings, or the predictions that did not come true. The recognition, the truth-telling about a certain kind of family and a certain kind of love and a certain kind of American life. That truth has been told from a house on Evergreen Terrace, in Springfield, in a state nobody can name, for longer than most institutions that claim to tell the truth have managed to keep going. That is what 36 years built. That is what was always being built, underneath the jokes, underneath the theories, underneath the mysteries. A mirror, held up to a certain kind of life, patiently, for a very long time. And the people who looked into that mirror and recognized something of themselves there are, right now, wherever you are watching this, settling in for the night, letting Springfield go quiet behind their eyes. The family is on the couch. The porch light is on. The loop goes around and around and around, and everything that needs to be said has been said now. Sleep? Section 32. The softest hour's final narration for the deep night. There is a time, past all the theories and all the analysis and all the careful examination of what the show has been doing for 36 years, where the words start to arrive more slowly, where the space between sentences opens up, where the images are less sharp and more felt than seen, where Springfield becomes less a place you are thinking about and more a place that is simply there, in the comfortable background of your awareness, the way that familiar places are there when you are almost asleep. This is that time. Let the words come more slowly now. Springfield is there, the town that cannot be found on a map. The yellow light in the windows, the plant on the hill, the tire fire at the edge of things, burning its patient orange burn. The Simpsons are in their house, all 5 of them, under one roof. In the arrangement they have maintained for 36 years, the specific configuration of a family that chose each other, in a town that gives them every reason not to, and keeps choosing. Homer is on the couch. He found his way back, as he always does. The journey was long and contained several disasters, as it always does. And then he was home. The door closed. The couch received him. The cold beer waited. Marge is nearby. She is thinking about something. She is always thinking about something. But her thinking is quiet tonight, as it gets sometimes in the late hours when the household is settled and the day's immediate demands have been managed, and there is a moment, brief and real, of simply being in the house she built with the person she chose. The kids are upstairs. Bart is asleep in the deep way of someone whose mind runs fast during the day and goes still at night. Lisa is close to sleep, the book resting open on the pillow beside her, the reading giving way to the night. And Maggie, in her room, in her crib, behind closed eyes, whatever she carries behind those enormous eyes going quiet for the night, the house settles. The sounds of a house at rest, the small sounds that are not quite silence. Outside, Evergreen Terrace is quiet. The other house is dark. The porch light on at the Simpson house, as always the small accidental beacon. The plant hums on the hill. The river moves. Springfield goes on, as Springfield always goes on, in whatever state it is in tonight, under whatever sky this particular night has provided. And somewhere in a hospital room the show will never show you, or perhaps only in the dream. The dreamer breathes steadily, and the dream continues, and the family is together, and the house is warm, and nobody has to say goodbye yet. The loop goes around. Homer is home. The family is on the couch. The porch light is on. You can sleep now. Springfield will be there when you wake up. It always is. That is the whole point. Good night. A final note on watching. There is something worth saying, in the quietest possible way, about what it means to watch a show like this over a very long period of time. Most things in life change. The people you know change, or they move away, or they become different versions of themselves that you have to relearn. The places you have lived change, or you leave them, and the version of the place that lives in your memory and the version that exists in the present gradually diverge until the memory is all that remains of the place you actually knew. Your own understanding of yourself changes in ways you do not always notice until you look back at an earlier version and find that person recognizable but remote. Springfield does not change. That is the show's greatest trick and its most honest gesture simultaneously. The town where nothing ages, the family that stays on the couch, the loop that refuses to break, all of this is the show's way of offering something that the rest of life does not offer. A place that is still there. Still the same. Still holding the same people in the same house with the same light on the porch. You can go back to it whenever you need to. At 2 in the morning when sleep is not coming and you need something familiar. On a Sunday when you want to go somewhere without going anywhere. On any of the ordinary and extraordinary occasions when the world has been too much of itself, and you need the specific comfort of something that has always been there and intends to keep being there. Springfield will be there. Homer will be home. The family will be on the couch. And for 22 minutes, or 5 hours, or however long you stay, everything will be exactly as it was. The three-eyed fish in the river, the bones in the basement nobody has explained, the billionaire on the hill who has been there longer than anyone can account for, the baby watching everything with enormous eyes and saying nothing, the dreamer on the couch who may or may not have ever woken up. All of it still there. All of it still waiting. You have spent a long time in Springfield tonight. You have earned your sleep. Let the town go quiet behind your eyes. Let the cooling towers settle into the background. Let Homer find his way home one more time. He always does. Good night from Springfield. Wherever Springfield is tonight, the show keeps running. Springfield keeps burning its tire fire and running its reactor and forgetting its catastrophes and voting to keep its comfortable lies. And we keep watching. Because some part of us needs a place that does not change. Some part of us needs Homer to find his way home. Some part of us needs Marge to be patient and Lisa to play and Bart to land the skateboard trick and Maggie to watch and know and wait. We need the family. We need Springfield. We need the couch and the cold beer and the blue light of the television in the window and the knowledge, certain as the tire fire, that whatever happened today and whatever is going to happen tomorrow, the loop goes around and the family is together and Homer is home. That is enough. That has always been enough. Sleep now. Let Springfield take you the rest of the way. Good night. The tire fire. The cooling towers. The river. The impossible geography. The yellow skin and the 4 fingers and the 3 eyes and the bones nobody explained, and the glowing man in the woods and the baby with the gun and the billionaire who remembered the Spanish-American War. The coma dreamer in his hospital bed. The mother on a train out of town. The father who chose the fog. The sister who chose the silence. The other sister who chose to keep asking. All of it still there. All of it built into the town that cannot be located. All of it visible to anyone who looks at Springfield carefully enough and long enough, and without the instinct to normalize what should not be normal. The show has been telling you. It has always been telling you. The three-eyed fish was the beginning of the sentence. 36 years later, the sentence is still going. Still adding clauses. Still refusing to arrive at a period. Because in Springfield, sentences do not end. They loop. They circle back. They begin again, fresh, with the same characters and the same town and the same impossible situation and the same impossible love. Homer is home. The family is on the couch. The porch light is on. And wherever you are right now, whatever hour it is in your corner of the world, there is a town and a state nobody can name where 5 yellow-skinned, 4-fingered people are together under one roof, and they are choosing each other. And the loop goes around, and the credits roll, and the show begins again. It always begins again. That is the whole story. Sleep well.